Chapter 1334. Her name was Dao Tanxiang. She wasn't trying to please the king of Beiliang. In fact, she had been paying attention to Hsu Fengnian for a long time. At that time, he was still the infamous good-for-nothing His Royal Highness. Dao Tanxiang's father, Dao Shenlong, had spent a lot of money to buy a famous painting from Beiliang Palace. It was Ladies of the Dragon Palace from the Western Shu Kingdom of the previous dynasty. When she saw the two huge fakes, she was stunned. How could there be such a bastard in the world who would waste natural resources so recklessly? Every time these celebrities and refined scholars opened a scroll, they would look at it with a pilgrimage mentality. It would definitely be passed down from generation to generation. As long as it was well preserved, it might even be placed on a table to be admired 500 or even 1,000 years later. Wasn't this guy afraid that he would go down in history because of those two words? Later, she was a little angry. As long as it was a painting with His Royal Highness's seal, she would ask her father to buy it back at a high price. It was funny. At that time, Dao Shenlong, who was only a secondary 7th-rank official, spent a lot of money to buy fakes. Because of this, the governor of Yanji County, Hong Shandong, who was a righteous official, thought that this person was a talent. Especially when His Royal Highness became the king of Beiliang, Dao Shenlong was promoted again. Over time, Dao Tanxiang collected no less than 30 paintings with Hsu Fengnian's seal. Not all of them were fakes. For example, Hsu Fengnian's hastily written calligraphy was privately praised by collectors in the capital for being witty and interesting. There was also a concise and vivid phoenix portrait seal with rough words. The mother-son seal on Loquat was even more memorable. So Dao Tanxiang slowly felt that she had known this man for a long time. She knew every news he had received from Liang Lake, from the capital's imperial court, and from Beiliang's officialdom over the years. She gently placed her hands on her knees and raised her head to look at the man who had never been domineering. Every time he frowned and every time he smiled warmly, she would carefully observe it as if she was collecting a treasure. After another 2 hours, Hsu Fengnian smiled and let the old Dao Jinzhao go to bed first. He continued to chat with Dao Wenhai by the light. Their topics were broader, and they were no longer limited to Yuzhou or even Beiliang. Instead, they included the politics and military of Liang and Beimang, as well as the local customs of the two dynasties. When the Dao family patriarch left, he went to his granddaughter, Dao Yanxiang, and asked her to make tea and prepare some pastries. Therefore, when they moved to the couch by the window to chat, she sat between the king of Beiliang and Uncle Dao Wenhai. It was a bit humorous. When the sky began to brighten, Dao Wenhai, who was in high spirits and didn't feel sleepy at all, still got up and bid farewell. He asked the king of Beiliang to allow Dao Tanxiang to stroll around the Dao residence with him. Hsu Fengnian smiled and nodded in agreement. The two of them strolled toward the Dao library. From beginning to end, the two of them were shoulder to shoulder apart and didn't give off the feeling of being neither close nor distant. Hsu Fengnian said apologetically, "Miss Dao, you've worked hard." She shook her head and said with a smile, "It's not hard at all. It's just that grandfather might be a bit disappointed, but I'm not disappointed. I'm very content." Hsu Fengnian smiled knowingly and didn't mince his words. You don't have to worry about not being able to find a husband. Nowadays, there are a lot of handsome scholars who want to become officials, and there are also many who are talented and learned. Dao Tanxiang made a sound of acknowledgement and walked closer to the building. She said, "People of the world value editions and complete order when it comes to collecting books. For example, there is a saying that 1 page is worth 100 taels of silver and a set is worth 1,000 taels of gold. However, our library doesn't care about this. Grandfather feels that nothing is as important as the words of the sages in the books. Rather than spending 1,000 taels of silver to buy a set, it's better to buy 100 sets of normal books. Therefore, the number of books in this library is no less than those in the Central Plains. Furthermore, if scholars come to borrow books to read, they will be able to do so without obstruction." Hsu Fengnian nodded and said, "I've heard that your Dao family is also fully responsible for the food and lodging of the scholars who come to study. That's very rare. The scholars of Beiliang don't travel as much as the Central Plains, but because of your Dao family, Yanji County doesn't lose to Jiangnan. Dao Tanxiang said gently, my father once said that a prosperous family is like a person with plump skin. However, if the yang energy is too strong and isn't adjusted, there will be a day when the internal organs will be damaged. Thus, our Dao family's year after year of disaster relief, borrowing books, and kindness to our neighbors are all necessary treatments. We can't wait until the illness is beyond cure to mend the pen after the sheep is lost. HSU Fengnian joked, just based on these words, your father is more than qualified to be a governor. HSU Fengnian walked toward the door of the Dao Manor. As he crossed the threshold, he said to Dao Tanxiang, you should go back first. It's very hurtful for a woman to stay up late. I still have to go to the memorial arch to wait for someone. She narrowed her eyes and smiled brilliantly. She said mischievously, it's fine. I really want to know who in the world can make the king of Beiliang wait. HSU Fengnian dismissed it with a smile. The two of them stood under a memorial arch. After waiting for a long time, a carriage and a group of more than 100 white horses finally appeared at the end of their vision. Dao Tanxiang turned her head and happened to see him smile. She saw him quickly walk over to greet them. She did not follow. She stood where she was and watched his figure gradually disappear into the distance. The carriage and the group of riders neatly stopped. Dao Tanxiang saw a young woman whose face could not be seen clearly walk down from the carriage. HSU Fengnian looked at the woman who had come all the way from the prince's mansion in Liang province. He asked gently, are you cold? She shook her head. One of the riders who had come with the white horse righteous attendant did not dismount from his horse. He only exchanged glances with HSU Fengnian and nodded. Then, he turned his horse around and rode away. This rider did not carry a saber or a crossbow. He only carried a heavy iron spear. But with this rider and spear, the entire Yuju would not fall into chaos. HSU Fengnian asked for a war horse from the white horse righteous attendant. He first carried her onto the horse. Then, he mounted the horse himself. The two of them rode together. HSU Fengnian said apologetically, I promised you before that I would see the scenery of Beiliang. She leaned into his warm embrace and did not say anything. HSU Fengnian squeezed the horse's belly and galloped along the path the white horse righteous attendant had taken. Other than the two of them and the horse, there was no one else around. Her face glowing, she raised her hands to her mouth and said with a childish smile, HSU Fengnian takes Lu Chengyang and the white horse righteous attendant to Beiliang. The white horse righteous attendant to Beiliang. 1,000 li swift wind. Chapter 1335. When Beimang's army was pressing on the border on 3 fronts, the Liang imperial court had not learned of this matter. Beiliang would not pass this military intelligence to the capital. Even if the capital heard of this, they would probably only breathe a sigh of relief. Barbarians killing barbarians, dogs biting dogs, it had nothing to do with them. It would be best if both sides were heavily injured. It would be a great thing to drive away bad luck for the Liang imperial court. On the straight official road outside the south gate of the capital, there were 4 people who didn't have passports. A couple with a child. The child was riding on the neck of the man with the sword. It was clear that they were a family of 3. Then there was an extra white-clothed person beside them. This white-clothed person gave people a vague feeling. In terms of appearance, he was not outstanding. He did not have the beauty of a woman, nor was he as handsome as a man. The people nearby did not dare to look at this person. They only glanced at him. But when they thought about it, he should have left some impression. But they did not have the courage to look again. As for the inconspicuous family of 3, they were naturally ignored. The man holding his child's legs looked at the city walls of Great Peace City and sighed. In the world, this is probably the only city that can make things difficult for me. I want to go in, but I'm afraid of causing trouble. The 3 of us do not have proper identities in Liang, and we can't really force our way in. It's also not appropriate to sneak in at night. At the time, there was a person surnamed Xie in the city. He was not my match in fighting, but it was easy for him to find me. I wanted to take my wife and daughter in to play, not to go in and kill everyone. For this kind of thing, it would be better if I was 20 years younger. The white-clothed person laughed coldly. Didn't Hong Shixiang do it? The man said helplessly, aren't you comparing me to Ancestor Lu? The white-clothed person said calmly, in terms of those unclear identities, would you lose? Even in terms of martial talent in this life, you would not lose. In the end, you fell to a state worse than Tuoba Bodhisattva. The man had a smug look on his face as if he had nothing to say to her. His wife quickly smoothed things over and said with a smile, my husband was born lazy. Actually, isn't it pretty good? He doesn't have to fight with others for no reason. It's also peaceful. The man nodded in agreement. That's right. The child rested her chin on her father's head and nodded along with him. Although she didn't understand anything, she still cheered, that's right, that's right. The white-robed person gazed at Great Peace City. Over the past 800 years, from the Great Qin dynasty to Liyang, apart from the most majestic city in the world in front of her, she had been to almost every capital city. The child suddenly said, Father, didn't Mother say before that there was a guy who liked to wear green clothes who often went to the city? Why do you have a headache? Father, it doesn't matter if you can't defeat my future master, but you can at least fight for the second or third place in the world, right? The man rubbed his chin and said seriously, that's true. The woman pinched him hard on the waist. Just as the man was about to speak, he found that the person he had been traveling with had turned and left. He really was as lazy as his wife had said. He couldn't be bothered to use his brain to think of the reason, but he couldn't help but complain. Aren't your identities as the great demon Luo Yang a mess? Do you have the right to criticize me? The white-robed person was Luo Yang. He was the person who had run from Beimang to Liyang and found his wife. Then because his wife said that swordsmen were the most natural, he found a sword and pretended to be a swordsman. He had a precious daughter and met Luo Yang and Tuoba Bodhisattva at the foot of Mount Hui. If this was in Beimang, his fame would be great. Beimang had 5 large sects. The sect he belonged to was one of them, and he was the only member of the sect. The only one in the world. One person, one sect. Of course, he knew that he was very talented in martial arts, but he had never pursued anything like becoming the first in the world. It was like his wife wasn't that beautiful, but he fell in love with her at first sight. There were always some things in the world that didn't have a reason. His only pursuit was to be unrestrained. When he was young, he had his own freedom. After he met his wife and had a child, he had the freedom of a family of 3. As for what freedom was, he didn't want to think about it. Looking at the majestic city, he could clearly feel the flow of fate. Presumably, after the new emperor of Liyang ascended the throne, because Han Shengxian, Master Liu Hao, and the one surnamed Xie were all dead, he was afraid that he would be beheaded after wearing the dragon robe and sitting on the dragon throne for a few days. Therefore, he set up layers upon layers of murky traps. This was reasonable. With the Liyang dynasty's thriving national strength, they wouldn't be completely helpless against a single top martial artist. His daughter suddenly whispered, Father, I want to eat leek pancakes. The man stilled and then turned with a grin to look at his daughter-in-law who was not as important as him. The woman stepped on his foot. Idiot. What are you practicing martial arts for? Can't your daughter eat a pancake? She quickly added, it's not like we don't pay. The man who had received the imperial decree nodded and smiled. All right. He freed a hand to hold his wife and said softly, Daughter, hold tight. In an instant, all the first-grade experts in Great Peace City, both on the surface and under the surface, felt a great presence. The northern sect's dragon rising chi refinement warriors were panicking like headless flies. The man raised a smiling face. What was freedom? At least at this time, he knew the answer. Freedom. That was when his daughter said she wanted to eat pancakes. Even if the entire Great Peace City wanted to stop her, they could not stop him. Huyen Grand Monastery. There was a flash of light on the road like a rainbow falling into Great Peace City. Great Peace City did have the saying of late autumn cabbage and spring leeks. These two things, whether it was the officials, the nobles, or the common people, every family could afford to eat them and liked to eat them. The people of Jing liked to use leeks to eat spring. It was the best season. Eating a bite of the spicy and fresh green leeks could expel the foul energy that had accumulated in the organs all winter out of the stomach. In the Zhao family manor, which was the largest building in the capital, the burps of many officials emitted the smell of leaks, not to mention the farts that came out from under the buttocks of some officials. It really made people frown, but soon they smiled. On Zhao Jiawang's side, there was the Hanlin Academy, which had always been noble and aloof. There were also the two big yamens of the two provinces under the Hall of Governmental Affairs, which used to be deserted but now slightly lively. However, the most boisterous ones were the yamens of the 6 ministries of Shangshu province. The Ministry of War had always been the most important place among the 6 ministries of external court. Even after the Prime Minister Yin Maruchun replaced Zhao Yuling as the Minister of Personnel Affairs, he could not change the situation. Unlike the other 5 great generals, who had their fates changed every few years, the Ministry of War had only had 3 people who had been in that position since the first year of Yonghui to the second year of Xiangfu. They were the great pillar state Jiyu Zhentang, the king of Shu Chen Jibao, and the current Tongxi sword deity Lu Baijie. The latter two had only been in that position for less than 2 years. Without a doubt, the Ministry of War had always been the fengshui treasure land that the new Jinsha wanted to have the most. So much so that last year, Jiao Tingshu, who had been the second place of the imperial exam, admitted that he would rather be the head of the Department of Martial Selection and Purging Officials than go to the Ministry of Rights to be the most easily promoted Minister-Counselor of the Department of Rights. One had to know that the Minister of Rights, Bai Guo, was present in the main hall at the time. Minister Bai was so angry that he laughed and kicked the other minister, Lu Baijie. Rumor had it that Bai Guo was transferred to the Minister of Revenue. One day, he met the new second place in the imperial court. The Minister of Rights teased him, "Fortunately, I didn't take up a post in the Ministry of Appointments. Otherwise, you would be sitting on the cold bench in the Ministry of War for 10 or 20 years. Today, the unusually busy Ministry of War had a somewhat unexpected guest. Everyone in the Ministry of War, whether they were walking outside or sitting inside, either stopped and saluted when they saw him or stood up solemnly. Everyone looked excited. It was not much different from meeting the emperor alone. It was very simple. It was because this person was Jiyu Zhentang, the youngest warrior of the 4 great generals of the spring and autumn period, the former master of the Ministry of War, Jiyu Lu. As a general, Xu Xiao, who was also a famous general of the spring and autumn period, had already died of old age. Jiyu Zhentang could not even be considered old. As an official, Zhong Lu, who had been in conflict with Jiyu Lu for more than 10 years, had already collapsed. Zhong Julu had died a miserable death. Jiyu Zhentang, on the other hand, was the only super first-rank pillar of the Liang imperial court. He held the power of 300,000 soldiers and horses at the northern border. Jiyu Zhentang walked alone into the large room of the old Zhong Lu. Without needing him to say anything, a large group of arrogant officials in the 6 ministries stood up and saluted, then quickly sat down and continued with their work. This was the cold and hard temperament that Jiyu Zhentang had left for the Ministry of War. You can be arrogant and despotic in your conduct, but you must be swift and decisive in your work. You must not be sloppy. Unlike the other 5 ministers and assistant ministers who each had their own room, the 3 main and assistant ministers of the Ministry of War all worked in the same room. The minister's desk was placed at the far left of the room, while the left and right assistant ministers' desks were placed at the far right. At present, of the 2 assistant ministers of the Ministry of War, the general of Pro Yi, Lu Shengxiang, was not in the capital as the general of the southern expedition. The newly appointed assistant minister, general of Dragon Xiong, Xu Gong, was patrolling the border in accordance with the new etiquette of Liang. Thus, only the minister, Lu Baijie, was left in the room. After seeing Jiyu Zhentang, he did not deliberately put on airs. Instead, he stood up like his subordinates and stood up to greet the old minister. He even waited for the others to return to their seats before standing up. This was not only because Lu Baijie's official patch with a second-rank lion embroidered on his chest was slightly inferior to Jiyu Zhentang's first-rank chelin. It was also because Lu Baijie had undisguised respect for the senior of the Ministry of War, Jiyu Zhentang. Lu Baijie walked around the table to Jiyu Zhentang's side and said with a smile, "General, sit down and have a cup of tea." Chapter 1336. Jiyu Zhentang nodded. Lu Baijie took the lead and walked to the two empty tables on the far right side of the room. Soon, the second-ranked scholar who had written The Drunken Eight Immortals and had been personally threatened by Minister Bai Guo arrived with tea. He first served it to Jiyu Jiantang, who was far away, and then to Lu Baijie, who was close at hand. After Jiyu Jiantang took the tea, he slowly asked, "You're not going to Gao Tingshu of the Ministry of Rights?" The young manager of the Department for Purging Officials, who didn't dare to make any unnecessary moves and only wanted to leave as soon as possible, couldn't help but tense up. He said in a trembling voice, "That's me." Jiyu Jiantang didn't have a smile on his face. He asked the newcomer of the Ministry of War a rather sharp question: "Why didn't you serve tea to Minister Shangshu first?" Gao Tingshu was speechless. Lu Baijie laughed and said, "Great General, oh great General, you're obviously secretly happy. Don't take advantage of the situation and pretend to be obedient. Manager Gao took a huge risk to come to our Ministry of War. No matter what, he's half a family member of yours. You don't have to scare a junior like this." After being disturbed by Lu Baijie, Jiyu Jiantang no longer deliberately kept a straight face. He smiled and said, "Just for the sake of you serving tea first, even if the Ministry of Personnel suppresses you in the future, I'll first ask Minister Bai for a favor. I guarantee that I won't delay your promotion in the future. But you should learn a bit more. Look at how Minister Bai became an official. He not only gave himself a way out of the embarrassing situation, but also made you remember that he helped you get out of trouble." Lu Baijie's face was full of helplessness. Hey, great General, you're not being kind. It's one thing to freeload tea, but you're also undermining me. In the future, I'll have no prestige in this room." Lu Baijie turned his head and glared at Gao Tingshu. He pretended to be angry and said, "Stinking brat, get out of here. Aren't you afraid that I'll make things difficult for you? Do you want to annoy all the ministers of the 6 ministries? When the time comes, even if you have the great general to protect you, at most you'll have to run to the border to drink the wind and eat the sand." Gao Tingshu hurriedly wiped the sweat on his forehead, turned around and trotted away with a silly smile. The officials of the Ministry of War, who were actually secretly listening, immediately burst into laughter. Amidst the laughter, everyone was naturally envious of Gao Tingshu's good fortune. He immediately left a good impression in the hearts of the 2 ministers of war. Jiyu Jiantang finished the tea in one gulp. After putting down the teacup, he sighed, "It's not easy for Minister Lu." Lu Baijie lowered her head and took a sip of the bitter tea. She nodded with a bitter smile and said, "It is quite difficult." Jiyu Jiantang was silent for a long time. After standing up, he said, "I'm about to leave the capital and return to Liaoshi. I won't disturb you any longer." Lu Baijie stood up as well and said calmly, "Let's see the Grand General off." After the two of them walked out of the room, Lu Baijie hesitated for a moment before asking in a low voice, "Is the Grand General really leaving?" Jiyu Jiantang grunted. Like the Minister of War beside him, he was not as relaxed as he was in the room. His expression was serious. "If I had decided to stay before we reached the capital, there would still be hope. Now, even if I insisted on staying, do you think it would be possible?" Lu Baijie was speechless. The Grand General Jiyu Jiantang's meaning was not deep. When the late emperor was alive, Jiyu Jiantang had accompanied him all the way back to the capital. However, he still could not persuade the late emperor to let him, a pillar of the northern region military and politics, replace Lu Shengxiang to preside over the southern expedition. Now that the new emperor had ascended the throne, how could Jiyu Jiantang rely on his past achievements to coerce the new emperor? In fact, Jiyu Jiantang and Lu Baijie both agreed with a certain someone's prediction of the situation. The suppression of the rebellion in Guangling should be done quickly. The imperial court had sent Lu Shengxiang, Yang Shunxing, and Yang Zhenchuan to the southern expedition, assisted by several vassal lords. In terms of military strength, it was actually enough. It could not be considered a genius, but it was certainly not a bad move. However, a very small number of people had forgotten one thing. The deployment of troops and the deployment of troops on the battlefield was much more straightforward than the officialdom where everyone could sit behind closed doors and drink slowly. Lu Shengxiang had excellent talent as a general, but at that time, The undercurrent of the imperial court did not give this general of the assistant minister of the Ministry of War a chance. Not only did he not have a chance, but he was also a burden to the point where it was extremely difficult to deploy troops. As a result, the imperial court forcibly turned the situation into a rotten quagmire. If Jiyu Gentang had been in charge, even if there was a group of rich playboys who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth stirring up trouble, Yang Shunxing absolutely would not have been greedy for merit and rashly advanced. Thus, the imperial court would not have harmed Yang Zhenchuan's entire 30,000 cavalry and caused the two vassal lords, Zhao Ying and Zhao Zun, to almost be sent to their deaths. Jiyu Gentang quietly slowed down his steps and said, Lu Shengxiang has obtained the position of General Pro Yi. If nothing unexpected happens, he will vacate the position I just sat in. At that time, my subordinate, General Tang Taizhuang of Liaoxi, will enter the capital to take over. This is not good news, but it is also not bad news. I'm just taking this opportunity to tell you about it first. Tang Taizhuang is different from Lu Shengxiang and Xu Gong. He is not good as an official, but he is very good at leading soldiers in battle. After he enters the Ministry of War, Minister Lu, you should try to get him to bring a few young people with him to the Guangling circuit. At that time, it might be south of the capital. Jiyu Gentang said calmly, the reason I'm saying this is not out of selfishness. I want Tang Taizhuang to have a smooth career as an official. I just hope that in your hands, the Ministry of War can retain the taste of the battlefield for a few more days. In the future, those sitting in the Ministry of War probably won't know what horse dung tastes like, and even fewer will have calluses on their thighs from riding horses. Lu Baijie sighed and said, this matter shouldn't be too difficult. Jiyu Gentang suddenly turned his head to look at the former Jiyu Lu. In the dusk, there were still some remnants of the spring sun shining on the roof. Jiyu Gentang then smiled at Lu Baijie and said, there's no need to see me off. I'm going to a place I never had the chance to go before. Lu Baijie stopped in her tracks and watched the great general leave. He knew where Jiyu Gentang was going. The former Zhonglu. Zhonglu was originally where the Ministry of Personnel was located. After all, no matter how arrogant Jiyu Gentang was when he controlled the Ministry of War for many years, the Yamen of the Ministry of Personnel was still nominally the most important place of the external court in Liang. Later on, Zhao Yuling parted ways with his teacher, and the Ministry of Personnel was moved. At that time, Wang Xiongui, the only one left who stood firmly behind the Grand Secretary as a proud student, did not move into Zhonglu. However, at that time, the Ministry of Personnel, the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Revenue, the Ministry of Rights, and the Ministry of Justice all had an assistant minister sit obediently in Zhonglu so that the civil official leader could convey his intentions, or rather, his will, to the various joints of the 5 ministries as quickly as possible. Now, Zhao Yuling was promoted to the Hall of Governmental Affairs, and Yin Mao Chun was in charge of the Ministry of Personnel. The latter unexpectedly chose to sit in that room. Of course, there would no longer be any mention of Zhonglu in the world. Compared to the oft-mentioned Jiyu Lu, this place was not even mentioned again. It was as if it had never appeared in the Liang imperial court. Jiyu Gentang walked to that place and looked there. Under the curtain of night, compared to Jiyu Lu, there was not even a trace of afterglow there. On his return to the capital, that night, the emperor, who had not yet been called the previous emperor, stood in the imperial prison. That was the last time Jiyu Gentang saw that person and passed on his last words. That person was separated from him by the iron fence, but he did not say even half a word of his last words. He only waved his hand at Jiyu Gentang. Jiyu Gentang gathered his thoughts. He did not look at the important members of the Ministry of Personnel who rushed out of the room and down the steps to welcome him. He also did not look at the Prime Minister, Yin Mao Chun, who had stopped at the door. Jiyu Gentang turned and strode away. An additional person had silently appeared in the capital. Logically speaking, let alone an additional person in the most virtuous place in the world, even an additional 1,000 people would be like a drop of water. However, no one could underestimate this sinful guest. King of Jing and Zhao Zun, the youngest vassal of the Liang dynasty with the surname of Zhao. From the time Zhao Zun was summoned to the moment Zhao Zun entered the capital, the Ministry of Rights had not been able to interfere. Everything had been handled by the imperial clan court. There were no walls in the capital that did not let in the wind. Small news had already begun to spread rapidly in the higher levels of officialdom. However, no one knew whether Zhao Zun's trip to Great Peace City was a blessing or a curse. In the battle outside Yaoyu Pass, the Duke of Huainan, Zhao Ying, who was also a vassal of the imperial clan, had died in battle after 3 victories. It was not appropriate to say that he was sullen, but it was also wrong to say that he was brave. He was brave, but he was too unstrategic. Abandoning the 3 passes and running to the plains to play a battle of cavalry, how could he be called wise? As for Zhao Zun, there was more praise than criticism. After all, this king of Jing had gone to save the Duke of Huainan and had almost been killed by the cavalry of the West Chu rebel army. The 2 vassals, who were 1 generation apart, did not have much of a relationship. From this, one could see that Zhao Zun's loyalty to the court was unquestionable. Compared to his father, the old king of Jing and Zhao Heng, there was a world of difference. However, His Majesty the Emperor had just inherited the throne, and the Emperor's heart was hard to fathom. Zhao Zun temporarily lived in a mansion on Junwang Street that had nothing to do with him. More than 100 years ago, it had been the private residence of a powerful official of the Liang dynasty. It was extremely illegal and occupied a large area, with more than 400 rooms. Among them, there were even halls that were several zhong above the street level outside. Later, about 40 years ago, the Liang Emperor bestowed it to Prince Zhongyi. Unfortunately, the title of prince was only hereditary for 1 generation before it was lost due to a crime. In the last 40 years, it had changed hands several times, and the owners did not live far away. The most famous of them was, of course, the old Grand Preceptor of West Chu, Sun Shiji. Although Zhao Zun was nominally a vassal who had gone to the capital to ask for punishment, the wording of the imperial edict was very strict. If not for the blind Mr. Lu's prediction, Zhao Zun really might have been scared out of his wits. At the time, Lu Shu's words were very simple: since you have gone, you should make the best of it. Chapter 1337. Since Zhao Zun was already here, he might as well make the best of it. These few days, he would often stroll around the mansion alone, admiring the bright corridors, towering ancient trees, and the surrounding mountains to his heart's content. At this time, Zhao Zun was standing in a pavilion in the middle of a lake with a smile on his face. The right leader of the imperial clan court, who had escorted him here after arriving in the capital, looked at him with disdain. Zhao Zun looked at him like he was looking at a wild dog on the side of the road. Perhaps he had heard some news yesterday and came here in a hurry to repair their relationship. His wrinkled old face bloomed with a smile. Of course, Zhao Zun would not make a fuss about it on the surface. He even gave the right leader a mercury jade thumb ring that he had prepared beforehand. The old fellow's eyes lit up when he saw it. Clearly, Mr. Lu had carefully prepared such a small item that hit his weak spot. In fact, other than the jade thumb ring, Lu Shu had also asked him to carry an ink-colored tortoise-back inkstone with him. He said that if the right leader of the imperial clan came out to receive him, he needed to give this item away. Zhao Zun sighed with emotion. Lu Shu, you really are a genius. When this king was still His Royal Highness, he always felt that the so-called top strategists like Li Yishan and Naylan Yusi were just heroes created by the times. Once placed in a time of peace and prosperity, they would fade into the crowd. Only after meeting you did he realize that no matter if they were in a time of peace or chaos, there would definitely be a place for them. Zhao Zun had previously thought that using the destruction of 6,000 cavalry to complete the retreat in order to advance arrangement was too heavy a price. But when Zhao Zun came to Great Peace City and stood in this mansion, he began to understand that Mr. Lu was right. Zhao Zun suddenly saw 2 figures appear on the shore of the lake and then walk toward the pavilion in the middle of the lake. No one led the way. Zhao Zun frowned and instinctively became alert. When the 2 gradually came closer, Zhao Zun was stunned. After recognizing one of them, he asked in confusion, "Brother Song?" The young phoenix of the Song clan, Song Kelly. The last time he came to the capital, Zhao Zun had a brief encounter with Song Kelly. Song Kelly bowed and said, "Greetings, King of Jing'an." Zhao Zun quickly smiled and said, "Brother Song, you don't have to be so polite." Song Kelly looked relaxed, And he was neither arrogant nor impatient. He didn't show the slightest sign of depression due to the decline of his family. Moreover, he and the grey-haired Confucian came to visit together, which made Zhao Zun very hesitant. Song Kelly said softly, "This is Mr. Yuan. Sun Shiji and the others from West Chu are just Mr. Yuan's guests." Zhao Zun wasn't stupid. He immediately figured it out. Her surname was Yuan, the real owner of this house. He was the #1 strategist of Li Yang that his father, Zhao Heng, hated to the bone, half-inch elemental tongue Bengxi. Zhao Zun bowed deeply. Junior Zhao Zun greets Mr. Yuan. Yuan Bengxi didn't say anything. He just waved his hand. Song Kelly smiled and said, "I'm here to tell you that you can leave the capital and return to Qingju soon." Before Zhao Zun could react, Song Kelly's words of very soon came true very soon. A eunuch from the ceremony directorate, dressed in a bright red robe, held the imperial edict and walked towards the three of them. His steps were very fast, but he didn't seem to be in a hurry. The old eunuch holding the imperial edict nodded slightly when he saw Yuan Bengxi. He then read the edict to the king of Jing and Zhao Zun. Zhao Zun naturally had to kneel. Song Kelly also took a step back and knelt to listen. Only Yuan Bengxi was facing the lake and turned a deaf ear to it. The head eunuch, who was one of the top 3 eunuchs in the world, didn't show the slightest change in expression. After receiving the imperial edict, Zhao Zun had to leave the capital quickly. Plus, without Lu Shu's plan, he didn't know how to talk to the emperor of Li Yang. He was afraid of making a fool of himself, so he took the opportunity to leave the pavilion. After Zhao Zun and the head eunuch left, Yuan Bengxi asked, "What do you think this eunuch from the ceremony directorate will be asked when he returns to the palace?" Song Kelly shook his head. Yuan Bengxi smiled and said, "The emperor won't care about the king of Jing'an. He will ask Yuan Bengxi if he is respectful when he sees the imperial edict." Song Kelly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Yuan Bengxi calmly said, "Previously I advised the late emperor that if Prince Jinggan, Zhao Zun, had the intention of concealing his strength during the Jingnan campaign, I would issue an edict to have him enter the capital, remove his title of nobility, and demote him to a commoner. If he failed despite all his efforts, he would be allowed to keep his title, but he would have to live in Great Peace City for a year or two." The late emperor took this matter to heart, but it's not that the current son of heaven doesn't care. However, to the son of heaven, Zhao Zun is just an ordinary vassal king. The son of heaven wants to use this opportunity to imitate the way the late emperor dealt with Zhongjulu. He wants to test the waters and nibble away at him bit by bit. Song Kelly said in a small voice, "That's too hasty." Yuan Bengxi didn't express his opinion. He struggled to open the conversation and continued, "Zhao Zun is very smart. It's not that he is smart. In fact, he is not as smart as his father, Zhao Heng. But he knows how to listen to the people behind him. I wanted him to stay in Great Peace City and watch the world change because Xiong Fan, as the backbone of the world, was too important and could not be lost. That blind but lively young person was a great variable. I originally wanted to completely disrupt the factions of Qingju, and have either Xu Gong or Tang Taizuang go to Xiongfan City. Now it seems that maybe one day, Qingju will become a place that the military will fight for. Liyang, Beimang, Beiliang, West Chu, Western Shu, Nanjiang, all of these are possible. Song Kelly wanted to speak but stopped. Strategists, scholars who plan, their identities are set. They are just scholars. Then it will depend on how they plan for the people they support. But before that, they must find the right person. Yuan Bengxi narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Li Yishan was right to find Xu Xiao. Zhao Changling was wrong. I was right to find the late emperor. Zun Ping was wrong. Nailan Yusi was right to find the Yang King Zhao Bing. Lu Shu was wrong to find Zhao Heng and Zhao Zun." Song Kelly asked curiously, "Then Song Dongming, Xu Beiji, and Chen Shiliang were right to find Hsu Fengnian?" Yuan Bengxi said with a smile, "I don't know." Song Kelly asked seriously, "Mr. also has things you are not sure of?" Yuan Bengxi asked in response, "Can there not be?" Song Kelly said with a smile, "Yes." Yuan Bengxi smiled and then said, "I once asked 2 monks the same question. Killing thousands and reviving tens of thousands, Is there something to do, or not to do? When I asked if killing 10 people and reviving tens of thousands, Yang Taisui nodded and said there was something to do. But when I asked if killing one person and reviving tens of thousands, Li Xiaoxin still refused to nod. After Yuan Bengzi finished speaking, he paused for a long time and pressed a hand on the pillar. He said, "Next, I will have you bring an imperial decree and a secret decree to Ji province. The former is for you to take root in Jinan. The latter is for you to give to that mad dog Yuan Tingshan, and have him boldly open the gates to Ji Bei." Song Kelly was puzzled at first, but then his face quickly paled. Yuan Bengzi said coolly, "Just make Beiliang more chaotic. Those who seek the living live, those who wish for the dead to die. The Beiliang cavalry is the best in the world. Then let the entire Central Plains wait and see." Just like in the past, Great Peace City welcomed the flying literary talent of the first month that could not be missed. For a time, rumors flew all over the place. The imperial examinations began in Dafeng, flourished in West Chu, and flourished in Liyang. In West Chu, the subjects of the imperial examinations were extremely complicated. After the reform in Liyang, the emphasis was placed on the imperial examinations. In a certain person's hands, the imperial examinations gradually became more focused on trial and error. At first, there was a clamor that the Grand Secretary neglected learning and only favored the imperial examinations. There were more and more people who passed the Grand Exam, going from 3 to 4 people in the Great Feng dynasty to 20 to 30 people in the West Chu dynasty. Then there were 100 people in the late Eternal Hui dynasty, until there were 200 people in the first year of Xiangfu dynasty. Because of the rise of the imperial examinations, many people who came from other places to take the examinations continued to enter and stay in Great Peace City. Thus, there were the two interesting things of passing the imperial examinations and passing the imperial examinations. Imperceptibly, the relationship between the literary and official circles was pulled closer. Li Yang's imperial examinations were held in the first month, and the results were released in the second month. Not to mention the fact that there were very few people who could pass the imperial examinations, the scholars who failed the examinations were not naive enough to think that it was over. They could not return to their homes. After all, the large amount of traveling expenses when they first came to Shangjing was not something most scholars could afford. Thus, they had to stay in the capital. Those who had connections would find friends and relatives, and those who did not would have to stay in the temples. During this period, other than continuing to study hard, they also had to learn how to get their favorite essays to be looked at by the officials or famous figures in the literary world. Or, they could directly send it to the officials of the Ministry of Rites other than the examiners of the imperial examinations. Thus, there were sayings like the Prime Minister's gatekeeper is a 7th rank official and the King of Hell is easy to meet, but the little ghosts are hard to deal with. The 7th rank gatekeeper was a bit unusual. After Tantanan, he had presided over the imperial examinations several times and was now the heavenly official. Naturally, there was a lot of traffic in front of Yin Maochuan's door. This was not strange. The Song family, which had produced 2 teachers, was also not strange. What was unusual was that this year, the residence that received the most name tags was not the residence of the head of the Secretariat, Qi Yanglong, nor was it the residence of the Great Master of Science, Yarrow Baifeng. It was not the residence of Yang Jieshi, who was both a relative of the imperial family and a scholar. Instead, it was the residence of 2 young officials. One was the new assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites, Jin Lanting, who was rumored to be the next head of the Ministry of Rites, and the other was the new Right Chancellor of the Imperial College, Sun Yin. It was said that the name tags received by these 2 gatekeepers could fill dozens of large baskets. Chapter 1338. The 2 most popular officials in Liyang also showed completely different attitudes. Even though Jin Lanting had a lot of work to do, he still tried his best to meet all the scholars. Even those who could not squeeze into the assistant minister Fu because they were ahead of the Empress Dowager and could not meet, official Jin would carefully review the letters and give them back to them. He would not be careless in his responses. As a result, he had to stay up all night almost every day. Other than meeting the scholars in person, he would also reply to essays and poems. Some of the best poems would even be passed around by Jin San Lang among the 8 talents of the capital. It could be said that he did not spare any effort to help those scholars gain fame. However, when compared to Sun Yin, Chancellor Sun Yin's son, he appeared to be extremely unreasonable. He accepted the invitation, but during the first 10 days of the first month, he did not receive anyone. He only casually replied to 7 or 8 copies of the letters he received. It was just that this fellow's performance during the martial arts lecture at the directorate was simply too shocking. Don't forget, it was this person who won the battle of words that shook the entire court. Thus, even though this person who was recognized as arrogant in the capital wrote the words "you don't know shit" in a letter, the person who received the reply still treated it as if he had received a treasure. He shamelessly spread the news and was treated as a joke by the entire Great Peace City. In just a few short years, it went from the Yellow Door Minister Fu to the Wine Minister Fu and then to the Assistant Minister Fu. Then, was it still far from the title of Minister Fu? After Jin Lanting sent off the other 7 of the 8 talents of the capital, he walked alone in the corridor. He knew that there was a mountain of letters on the desk in the study. He also knew that as long as the imperial examination had not officially started, the mountain would only pile up higher and higher. The Ministry of Rights was indeed the weakest of the 6 ministries. However, once he became an assistant minister, it was a clean yamen with oil and water. However, this kind of oil and water was more hidden than gold and silver. Jin Lanting stopped beside a pillar. He raised his head and closed his eyes. His face was filled with intoxication as he took a deep breath. Great Peace City, Great Peace City, how can I, Jin Sanlang, not be proud of my success? After a long time, Jin Lanting opened his eyes. His gaze was burning. He said in a voice that only he could hear, "Minister Fu, I will do better than you." The small house that Sun Yin currently lived in was rented. When he first rented it, he was only a small official in the province. The rent was lowered to 10 taels of silver every 3 months after Sun Yin racked his lips with the rich merchant. After Sun Yin's reputation rose, Fu Jiao eagerly ran to Sun Yin's door and said that he wanted to gift the house to the right chancellor. Sun Yin didn't agree and only changed the payment from once every 3 months to once every year. Today, Sun Yin wanted to go out. Through the crack in the door, he saw that there were still a dozen or so people waiting outside. Sun Yin turned and left through the back door. In the end, he was still stopped by a shabbily dressed young scholar. Sun Yin's path was blocked. The scholar introduced himself with a thick old Western Shu accent. Then, he bent over and handed over a stack of things with both hands. It could be many poems, or it could be a long essay. The scholar's face turned red. He mumbled something. It was clear that he had sent the examination to the assistant minister's manor. Most of the time, he had been examined by Jin Sanlang. It was also certain that Jin Lanting had only given him a dull and tasteless greeting. That was why he came to Sun Yin's place to try his luck. Sun Yin fumbled around and took out a handful of silver. He opened his palm and asked, "I haven't taken a fancy to anyone in the past 10 years. The things in your hands will most likely be mine. I can't even be bothered to scold you. The high officials in the capital all cherish their reputation. When they meet someone like you, they will at most pinch their noses and give you some money to send you off. Then, do you want me to give you the silver so you can quickly pay back the rent you owe me and have a few good meals? Or do you want me to look at your things?" The scholar from Shishu, who had an average appearance and temperament, shook his head and said, "I don't want money. I only want Lord Chancellor to look at my poems seriously." Sun Yin took back the silver. He took the stack of poems with neat handwriting. His left hand pinched a corner and his right hand casually flipped through 7 to 8 pages. Soon, he was about to hand it over to the scholar whose hands were full of frostbite. However, when the latter's hands were about to grab the poems, Sun Yin let go first. The poems immediately fell to the ground. Sun Yin looked at the scholar who had a stunned expression. He didn't know why, but he took out a small piece of silver. He casually threw it on the ground. When he brushed past the scholar, he sneered, "I won't pick up that piece of silver. To me, it is not worth mentioning. Your poem should be the same to you, because it's too worthless." Sun Yin swaggered off just like that. After walking far away, Sun Yin turned his head to look at that person. The scholar who was wearing thin clothes was squatting on the ground, picking up the poems page by page. Sun Yin even saw that person raise his arm to wipe his face. Sun Yin sighed and slowly walked towards a mansion that wasn't too far away. When he arrived, the gatekeeper, who was known to be extremely difficult to serve in the capital, didn't stop him at all. He even revealed a very sincere smile. This was obviously not as simple as Sun Yin being the second-in-command of the Imperial College. Without needing anyone to lead the way, he found Tantanan, who was eating peanuts and drinking wine in the study room. Sun Yin didn't say anything and just minded his own business and drank his wine. Huan Wen smiled and said, "Sephora flowers are yellow, scholars are busy. When spring turns green, it means you are busy. Just get used to it. When you reach my age, you won't be busy anymore." Chapter 1339. Sun Yin, who had drunk several large bowls of wine, suddenly picked up a pair of chopsticks and lightly tapped the edge of the wine bowl. He softly said, "The capital's snowy night freezes one's fingers, the broken-down temple beggars snore thunderously, the vermilion gates and high walls are warmer than spring, the purple-clothed and white-clothed old nobility, one can't close one's eyes and beg." Listening to Sun Yin's long speech, Huan Wen listened for a long time. A bowl of wine was brought to his mouth, but he didn't drink it. In the end, he couldn't help but laugh and scold, "What a mess." Sun Yin stopped and didn't say anything. Huan Wen drank a mouthful of wine and softly said, "But the meaning is still a little bit." Sun Yin calmly said, "I borrowed it with a piece of silver. I borrowed it, I can't afford it." Tantanan was shrewd and experienced. He only leisurely drank another mouthful of wine and let out a string of tsk sounds. It wasn't clear if the wine was too spicy or something else. Sun Yin asked, "There's no more wine?" Huan Wen rolled his eyes and said, "Young people shouldn't drink to drown their sorrows. Young people don't know what sorrows taste like. Only 70 or 80 years old, tired of living, would drink to destroy people's livers." Sun Yin glared and said, "Don't be jealous. Speak human language." Huan Wen slammed the empty wine bowl on the table and also glared and said, "You don't understand what I mean, kid. There's no more wine for you to freeload." Sun Yin slumped against the back of the chair. Huan Wen said angrily, "If you didn't know to take advantage of your official status and put your first month's salary into your pocket and quickly change it to a yearly payment with that merchant, you wouldn't even be able to enter my door, let alone drink those few bowls of wine." Huan Wen was really angry when he spoke of this. He used his finger to fiercely point at the youngest Right Chancellor in the history of the Imperial College. "You've got water in your head." With Beimang and Li Yang as the offensive and defensive sides, talking about martial arts. "Talk your head." Huan Wen grabbed the wine bowl on the table and threw it at Sun Yin. He didn't care that Sun Yin's forehead was bleeding profusely. He said in a stern voice, well said, in the face of a national calamity, you don't care about your body for martial arts, you don't care about your reputation for literature. An inch of blood for every inch of land. What a good Beimang. Going straight to Great Peace City. In this world, only you, Beiliang Sun Yin, know the art of war and understand the current situation. Sun Yin simply closed his eyes. He did not fight back, nor did he retort. The more Sun Yin acted like this, the angrier Huan Wen became. He slammed the table heavily. "Do you think His Highness the Crown Prince, who was sitting on the praying mat at that time, is a fool? The head of the Secretariat, Qi Yanglong, is a fool? Huan Wen cursed. Do you think I, Huan Wen, am a fool? F***CKU. Sun Yin said indifferently, "I'm sorry, my mother died a long time ago. F***CKU. Also dead. I don't care if your 18 generations of ancestors are dead or not." Sun Yin did not speak anymore. Huan Wen paused, his expression distressed. His hands trembled as he said softly, "Bai Yang never showed favoritism in his life. He only made an exception once for a bastard like you when he was alive." Sun Yin's expression was wooden. In the Imperial College, there were so many scholars who felt that the Beiliang's 300,000 cavalry should have all died. They even felt that it was okay if the millions of Beiliang citizens died. When Yang Zhenchuan died, they did not do anything. When Zhong Julu died, they were satisfied. These people felt that if they were Yang Zhenchuan, they could easily defeat Xiexhi's cavalry. These people felt that if they were Zhong Julu, they could have ruled the world long ago. These people were all scholars. Sun Yin lowered his head and covered his face with his hands. He said in a choked voice, "When I was young, I finally managed to get into a private school. Teacher was a remnant of the spring and autumn period who stayed behind in Beiliang for some reason when Hongjiao went north. I remember that teacher liked to take us to read and sing the song of everlasting regret. Before I left Lingju, I saw teacher for the last time. Teacher said that he did not expect that the sound of reading he heard in Beiliang was the same as the sound of reading he heard in his hometown. So teacher said that after he died, it was fine to be buried in Beiliang. The great peace city of these scholars is so peaceful. I do not want to see this kind of peace. I, Sun Yin, want to return to my hometown. I would rather see the smoke of war rise there." Huan Wen said to himself, "Sun Yin, if you want to return to Beiliang, I will not stop you. But I hope you know that the great peace city of the scholars you see is not the true great peace city, and not everyone's great peace city. This city had my teacher, Zhongjulu, Zun Ping, Yang Zhenchuan, and I, Huan Wen, who is still alive. There are many people that you do not know. Xu Xiao, Li Xiaoshan, Cao Changqing, Yang Taisui, they were all once in this place. They were so high-spirited, and each of them had a clear conscience. When you return to Beiliang, you may become an official, you may be a strategist, you may die on the battlefield with a clear conscience. But if you do not give up today, one day in the future, at a certain time, you will have a chance to say to another young person, in Great Peace City, there is me, Sun Yin. In this world, there is me, Sun Yin." In a secluded courtyard in a narrow alley, a woman sat quietly on the threshold of the inner courtyard. The wooden door of the outer courtyard was open. She looked outside the door. It was as though she was waiting for someone to come home. She would occasionally hear the melodious shouts of the hawkers selling candied fruits from the distance. But maybe because this alley was too small, she could not see the figures of the hawkers carrying the candied fruits pass by the door. She put a hand on her abdomen and said softly, "Border, the child and I are fine. But we miss you very much." Chapter 1340. If the post roads after the start of a war were compared to the meridians of a dynasty, then the endless supply of troops and provisions would be the blood of the empire. At this moment, Beimang displayed a huge tension that was enough to move the central plains. The Empress of Beimang, Taiping Ling of Chess and Sword Music School, and a fat man stood beside a post road. They looked at the busy transportation from north to south. The three of them had different expressions. The old lady, who was wearing a brand new mink coat, was full of pride. It was precisely because of her slow and appropriate governance that the Central Plains, which was on the verge of unification, did not gain the slightest bit of the upper hand for more than 10 years. She even forced Liang to spend half of the country's tax revenue on the Eastern Front, and finally led to the revival of West Chu in Guangling Road. Among her subjects, there was still Tuoba Bodhisattva, Dong Zhuo, Liu Gui, Huang Songpu, Murong Baoding, Yang Yuanzan, and a series of meritorious generals, not to mention the grassland eagle with the surname Yelu. They were a gathering of stars, shining brightly on the vast grassland. Standing beside the Empress was an ordinary-looking old scholar in a green robe. This old man, who had spent 20 years traveling the Central Plains, had a cold look in his eyes. As for the fat man, who was constantly hugging his hands to expel the cold, his body was already huge, and after wearing the armor, he looked even more bloated. The Empress of Beimang retracted her gaze and turned to look at the fat man whose reputation was notorious in the streets of Shijing. She joked, "South Chu and North Dong, two big fatties. Back then, you lost to Chu Lushan and were driven out miserably. Now that he has become the Protector General of Beiliang, you are the king of the South Courtyard. In terms of official position, you are already better than him. Do you have the confidence to get back at him this time?" Dong Zhuo, the king of the South Courtyard, who was in charge of the entire border war, did not grin in front of the old lady for the first time. He rubbed his cheeks and said softly, "If Lu Chioa and I had the same number of troops, it would probably be very difficult. But the current situation is that I have 1 million troops against his 300,000 troops. There is no reason for me to lose, but I always feel that it is a little unfair. When I see Lu Chioa, he will definitely not be convinced." The Empress of Beimang smiled and said, "I know myself well. I don't know much about war, so I don't have the bad habit of giving orders to the warriors at the border. It's just that your deployment of troops is so strange that I was so curious that I traveled more than 800 miles to see you. Even though the imperial decree of peace has patiently explained your intentions to me time and time again on the way, I still hope to hear it from your mouth. Otherwise, I won't feel at ease. After Huang Songpu heard about your deployment, he was so angry that his face turned ashen. He even shamelessly asked me to allow him to be the king of the South Courtyard again. He just wants you to pack up and get out of here, so that you don't squander the wealth that the South dynasty has accumulated for 20 years. Dong Zhuo clenched his fist, knocked on his red nose, and said in a muffled voice, among the Liuzhu, Yuzhu, and Liangzhu that border our dynasty, Liuzhu is the easiest to take, and Yuzhu is the most exhausting. But of course, the northern line of Liangzhu is the most difficult to take. At this point, Dong Zhuo paused for a moment. The Empress of Beimang waited patiently, but the fat man was completely silent. After waiting for a long time, the old lady could not help but laugh angrily. Are you done? Dong Zhuo continued, logically speaking, it's better to break one finger than to injure all 10. The main force should attack Liangzhu and march straight down, swaggering all the way to the Beiliang Palace on Mount Qingliang before stopping. Using a relatively small number of troops on the two flanks to tie down Yuzhu and Liuzhu is the best strategy. The Empress of Beimang nodded. It was obvious that she thought so too. In fact, this was the conclusion that Beimang had reached in the early stages of their discussion. The dried-up bait in Liuzhu did not interest the Beimang at all. Attacking Liuzhu was meaningless other than prolonging the supply line. If the stalemate in Liuzhu was prolonged, Beimang's gains would not make up for the losses. After all, there were several elite cavalry units on the border of Liangzhu that were equipped with terrifying long-distance attacks. Li Yishan had single-handedly created the situation of more than 100,000 refugees in Liuzhu. His original intention was to increase the breadth and thickness of Beiliang's strategy, which had always been its weakness. Dong Zhuo put on a distressed expression and said, this strategy was indeed the best strategy. However, after more than 10,000 light cavalry units infiltrated Jizhou, the situation began to change. Furthermore, Beiliang has been flirting with the western regions for the past few years. I'm afraid that when the time comes, not only the north of Jizhou, but also the western regions will emerge and attack the southern dynasties. When the time comes, the southern dynasties will be in a mess. I've considered Xu Fengnian's temperament. He's a scoundrel who's never afraid of dying together with others. He'd rather give up his headquarters in Liang province to defeat the southern dynasty. I'm sure he'd do it. Even if he has to wipe out all the Beiliang cavalry, he'll still destroy the foundation that Beimang has painstakingly built up over the past 20 years. This should be his plan. Dong Zhuo suddenly spat and cursed, King Liang. He's so lucky. After Xu Xiao the butcher left, he's replaced by that crazy Hsu Fengnian. Even if it were Chen Zhibao, I wouldn't be so conflicted. Dong Zhuo's eyes turned ruthless. He gritted his teeth and said, since Hsu Fengnian wants to risk his life, it's simple. I won't give him the chance to play tricks. Beimang's million-strong army will be divided into 3 groups. I'd like to see how he'll twist and turn. After all, we have the advantage in numbers on every front. Yang Wanwan said that 150,000 corpses are needed to fill the gourd, so I'll use 300,000. Liuzhu has 30,000 dragon elephant cavalry and those refugees. I'll use General Liu Gui's 200,000 to fight. Liangzhu is difficult to conquer. Will 500,000 be enough? If it's not enough, I'll ask your majesty for another 200,000 to 300,000. The Beimang Empress frowned and said, in this way, although the southern dynasty won't have anything to worry about, isn't the price too high? Dong Zhuo shook his head and said, the Liang imperial court dares to use West Chu to train their soldiers. As a people who live on horseback, we Beimang are natural warriors. Why wouldn't we use Beiliang to train our soldiers? The old lady wanted to say something but stopped. Dong Zhuo said in a deep voice, Your Majesty, I, Dong Zhuo, can promise you that even if Beiliang destroys 500,000 or even 600,000 of our soldiers, as long as we conquer Beiliang, I'll definitely return the 2nd million-strong army with both hands. The imperial decree of peace finally opened his mouth and said, "Your Majesty, after winning this war, Beiliang and Jizhou will soon become the second southern dynasty. All the civil officials of the southern dynasty are already prepared. Wherever the cavalry's hooves pass, it will be the beginning of the scholar's pen. This is the real backup plan that I've prepared for Beimang. As long as Beimang's army conquers those territories, I'll be able to manage those places immediately and let the Beimang dynasty's borders follow the war horses as they move southward." The Beimang empress nodded, but soon asked worriedly, "I'm not doubting your ability, but will the Liang imperial court give us enough time to digest the results of the war? Also, won't Jiyu Jiantang's eastern front take the opportunity to cause trouble?" The imperial decree of peace said calmly, "Everyone thinks that West Chu's revival is a flash in the pan, but I firmly believe that Cao Chongqing will be able to see the top of Great and City's city wall." Dongzhuo smiled and said, "Yuan Bengxi and the others felt that after the Battle of Liang Mang, even if they gave up the entire northwest to us, they would still have the two pillars of Liao, Jiyu Jiantang, and Western Shu, Chen Jibao, to support the border. Therefore, they were happy to see the last drop of blood of Beiliang. However, if it's really as the imperial decree of peace said, then Jiyu Jiantang will have to leave the two Liao and return to Greaton City. At that time, we can place a small number of troops in Beiliang to deal with Chen Jibao. Taking a step back, at that time, we will have the depth of Beiliang and the southern dynasty. This is a huge geographical advantage that cannot be ignored. Naturally, we will be able to greatly reduce the losses caused by Chen Jibao's troops. No matter how amazing Chen Jibao is, it will be difficult for him to turn the tide in a short period of time. However, we can follow West Chu's lead to Greaton City and take a look at the world's largest city with a population of millions. I, Dongzhuo, must go and see how tall the city wall is." The old woman said emotionally, after training with the Beiliang cavalry, then climbing up the city walls of Great Peace City, and taking care of Jiyu Jiantang and Chen Jibao in the central plains, the men of Beimang will kill their way to the southern border and throw themselves into the sea. Even though I am a woman, I feel heroic just thinking about it. Dongzhuo grinned. The magistrate of peace glanced at the king of the southern courtyard who had left everyone else in the dust in the Beimang court. His gaze was complicated. The empress of Beimang raised her hand and patted the fatty's shoulder. She said calmly, "As long as you can reach that step, I am not that Li Yang Jiao Dun. I can tolerate a Dongzhuo who seizes territory. South of Guangling River, everyone can have the surname Dong. I want the history books to remember the name Dongzhuo for hundreds and thousands of years. After 100 years." She looked to the south and laughed loudly. "In the future, whatever the surname of the world, I have no children, I don't care." With a thump, Dongzhuo knelt on the ground. The old woman kept looking to the south. "Old cripple, the world could have had the surname Shu." In the early spring of the second year of Xiangfu, a group of Beiliang crossbowmen roamed outside the mouth of the gorge in Yuju. As the sun rose from the east, the morning dew on their armor gradually dried up as the chill of late spring dissipated. Each of these elite scouts rode 2 horses. Their mounts were the best war horses from the largest pastures in Beiliang. With a great battle imminent, the best horses from the various pastures were given to these special troops first. Compared to the battle lines in Liangju, where an arrow was narked on a bow and could be triggered at any moment, Yuju, which had more strategic advantages, made people feel more at ease. This was because both sides in Liangmang acknowledged that if Beimang wanted to attack Yuju, they would have to use more than 100,000 lives to fill the gap or even flatten it. Butcher Xu Xiao had spent more than 10 years meticulously building the Wu castle system at the mouth of the gorge. It could be said that it had reached the pinnacle of defense in the history of the Central Plains. Endless black-armored cavalry poured into the mouth of the gorge like a flood. This scene was like the great tide of Guangling River. Chapter 1341. Once upon a time, there was a mountain called Wudong. There was a peak on the mountain called Lotus. A young Taoist once lived on the peak. He wanted to go down the mountain but didn't dare. His name was Hong Shixiang. But after that young headmaster returned from the mountain, it was said that he left the world. Then, the even younger headmaster, Li Yufu, brought back a young child with spirited eyes. His name was Yufu. Perhaps his parents hoped that this child would be able to save up some good fortune every year. If a poor family wanted to live a long and stable life, it was nothing more than saving up. The Lantern Festival was a big festival. In order to welcome the Lantern Festival in the second year of Shangfu, all the Taoists on Wudong Mountain, regardless of seniority, chopped bamboo to make lanterns and then pasted rice paper on them. Even the most senior Taoist masters like Chen Yaro and Yu Xingrui were no exception. Unfortunately, the oldest martial uncle on the mountain, Song Jiming, passed away last year. He didn't ascend to immortality. The old Taoist master passed away peacefully. He only muttered that if only his younger martial brother was still alive, he would be able to refine several furnaces of truly good pills. Then there was the month before the old man's death. He often saw martial Uncle Song standing at the gate of Big Lotus Peak, looking at the foot of the mountain. Needless to say, he was waiting for the headmaster's martial nephew. From Wudong's old Junren's Shifu Huang Manshan, to his Da Shixiang Wang Zhonglo, to his little Shidi Hong Shixiang, and finally the current Jiao Li Yufu, Song Jiming, other than the paintings of his ancestors, lived for 200 years, and met 4 Wudong Jiao Jiao, therefore, he passed away very peacefully. The older generation of Taoists was withering day by day. The great Taoist master Chen Yaro, who was in charge of discipline, also couldn't hide his old age. Fortunately, Wudong Mountain had always been indifferent to birth, old age, illness, and death. Moreover, Wudong Mountain was now flourishing with incense. Several peaks on the mountain held several not-so-grand but still solemn opening of the mountain ceremonies. Even though it was close to the Lantern Festival and the sky had not yet brightened, there were still many good men and women who started to climb the mountain to burn incense. It was different from the many Taoist temples in Liang that would specially open a back door for high officials and dignitaries, and the common people could burn incense for a lifetime without being able to burn the first incense. In Beiliang, as long as you were early, the common people could also burn the first incense on Mount Wudong. There was an endless stream of pilgrims on Mount Wudong's southern Divine Avenue, and there were even many foreigners who spoke with foreign accents. As Beimang's army was marching south, the 3 prefectures of Beiliang were like a funnel, and the population was plummeting. These foreign pilgrims were like carps swimming against the current, which was enough to show the prosperity of Mount Wudong. There were even rumors that the imperial court would soon transfer the title of Mount Longhu to Mount Wudong to appease the people of Beiliang. Among the incense-burning army, there was a young man and woman who looked like a young couple. Probably because they were from a small family, they did not wear embroidered clothes or mink coats, nor did they have intimidating squires. They did not even have a lantern. They were climbing the mountain together with another family they met at the foot of the mountain, and they used the family's lantern to make their way up the mountain easier. The young man introduced himself as Shu Qi, a native of Beiliang. His wife's surname was Lu, and her hometown was Qingju. In his words, she was married to a chicken and followed the chicken and dog, which was why she had come to Beiliang to suffer hardships. The large family traveling with them consisted of 4 generations, a total of 16 people. The old man's surname was Yang, and he was 80 years old. He said he was Taoist Guangling, and he had been an official in the capital as well as a local official. He had only returned to his hometown last year. The old man spoke humorously and was extremely talkative. Along the way, he chatted with Shu Qi about what he had seen and heard in the north and south of the Yangtze River, adding a lot of laughter to the boring mountain journey. Although Shu Qi did not say anything surprising, he was able to pick up on the old man's words every time. Other than the old man, the other 2 men of the Yang family originally did not like this so-called Beiliang barbarian. This could not be blamed on their arrogance. Among the many territorial disputes in Liang, Beiliang, where Xu Xiao was in charge, and Nanjiang, where Zhao Bing, the Prince of Yang, was in charge, had always been the big brother. Not to mention the second brother, both were barbarian lands in the imperial court. They could not even compare to the 2 Beiliang. As a result, there was once a big joke in the imperial court. They remembered that the first Beiliang scholar had passed the imperial examination like a carp leaping over the dragon's gate, becoming a jinsha. This made Taiyan City very surprised, and they wondered how there could be scholars in Beiliang. As a result, many people helped that scholar search the family tree. When they finally found out that the scholar's ancestral home was in Jeonju of the Central Plains, they felt relieved. However, they did not care about the fact that the scholar had been born and raised in Lingju of Beiliang for many generations. It was not until Yang Jieshi became a relative of the imperial family and then a grand scholar of the palace hall, Jin Lanting's meteoric rise, and the great scholar of Confucianism, Yarrow Baifeng, came to the capital to preside over the imperial college that their terrible impression of Beiliang as uncivilized was slightly improved. They pinched their noses and admitted that Beiliang also had a family tradition of scholars. The distance from the main peak of Wudong's Golden Peak to the southern Divine Path was 12 miles. It was also a mountain road. With the old and young of the Yang family, their legs were weak and they walked slowly. By the time the first morning bell rang, they were only halfway there. They rested at the pavilion for travelers and pilgrims to rest. The old man took advantage of the first rays of dawn to look into the distance. Shu Qi and his wife stood side by side, admiring the scenery below the mountain. After the old man retracted his gaze and sat down, his young great-grandson immediately ran over to massage his legs and feet. The old man laughed heartily and dotingly picked up the child and placed him on his lap. He pointed to the east and said, "This scene is called The Sky Opens to White." The child clearly had no interest in the sky opening to white. He raised his head and asked in a childish voice, "Great-grandfather, is there really an immortal on the mountain like my mother said? Can immortals ride on the clouds?" The old master of the Yang family laughed heartily and stroked the child's head. He did not give an answer. He only turned his head to look at the mountain peak shrouded in clouds and fog. He sighed softly and said, "I don't dare to speak loudly for fear of alarming the people in the sky." Chapter 1342. The child, who did not get an answer, kept pestering him. The old man could only say, "As scholars, we must scrupulously abide by the saint's words of not speaking of strange forces and chaotic gods. However, I can still talk to you about something else. In fact, when I was young, I used to travel under the guise of traveling and secretly went to visit immortals in green robes with a sword. Perhaps I didn't have the lucky chance, so I didn't meet those masters with white hair and youthful faces in the eyes of the world. However, when I was middle-aged, I went to the Taoist master mansion on Longhu Mountain with many people and met the old Taoist master of that generation. However, we didn't have the opportunity to have a deep conversation. After all, at that time, my official status was too low and I was only at the bottom. At that time, I felt that being an official was inferior to cultivating Tao. There were so many scholars in the world, and it was so difficult to become a scholar after the death of a grand tutor. There weren't many people who cultivated Tao in the world, so it was relatively easy to become a first-rank official. The child was disappointed. "Great-grandfather, then why did we come all the way to Mount Wudong? My father said that his bones were about to fall apart from the bumpy ride." A young Confucian scholar nearby suddenly blushed. The old man stroked his snow-white beard and smiled. "Great-grandfather has never seen immortals, but when I was in charge of a region, I met a Daoist priest of the same age. We had a pleasant conversation, and that Daoist priest taught me a set of body-nourishing techniques. The reason why great-grandfather can live to this age is because of that Daoist priest's kindness. Although so many years have passed, I still remember that Daoist priest's appearance very clearly. He was tall, benevolent, righteous, and heroic, with the style of an ancient wandering scholar. Compared to the yellow-purple noble of the celestial master's residence, he really didn't have any arrogance." The old man sighed. That Daoist priest was the previous leader of Mount Wudong, called Wang Zhonglo. I only found out that he was the leader of Beiliang's Mount Wudong after a long time, so before I was completely buried in the earth, I hurried here to take a look. At the same time, I also wanted to see how high Beiliang's northwest sky was. Because when great-grandfather was an official in Tian City, there was an imperial censor who impeached a person. He said that after that person arrived in Beiliang and held a banquet, he pointed to the chair under his butt and said to everyone that this chair was not the dragon chair, but it was much higher than the one in the capital. The old man's son was almost 60 years old. After hearing this, he laughed and said, "It's most likely nonsense." The old man nodded. Beiliang Shu Qi, who had been watching the old man carry his great-grandson, did not say anything. He turned around and silently looked into the distance. His wife held his hand, tilted her head and asked softly, "Is it true or not?" It was indeed the HSU Fengnian's Shu Qi. He said softly, "It's true. I was still young at the time. I was sitting on my father's lap. He was actually the one who said this to me. He probably wanted to tell me that being an emperor was meaningless." HSU Fengnian gripped Lu Chengyan's slightly cold small hand, quietly revealing the truth. Officials retiring at 70 is Liang Imperial Court's rule. Being able to retire at 79 is not something anyone can do. The old man is Yang Song, the highest-ranking official in the capital, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. He did not have the same political opinion as Grand Secretary Zhong Julu. Later on, he was pushed aside to Gangnam-do's Luzhu. He was disheartened, and thus began to study in peace. This time, Grand Secretary Zhong's reputation was ruined. The entire court kept quiet out of fear. Yang Song was one of the few who dared to stand up for Grand Secretary Zhong, so it could be seen that back then, he and Zhong Julu had an open and above-board dispute. The reason why I traveled with him was because Xu Xiao's impression of this person was not bad. Of all the people who scolded him, Yang Song scolded Xu Xiao fiercely, but it was reasonable. The old man suddenly smiled at HSU Fengnian. "Xu Qi, before I entered Beiliang's territory and came to Wudong Mountain, I visited a few academies. The scene there greatly surprised me. It seems like your new King Liang is even more scholarly than the old King Liang. It really is rare." Lu Chengyang glanced at HSU Fengnian, who revealed an expression of shame for the first time, and smiled knowingly. HSU Fengnian turned around and said, "It must be because he knows that his martial arts are not as good as Xu Xiao's, so he can only take a step back and fill in the gaps in his scholarly work." The child was confused. He tugged on the old man's sleeve and asked, "Great-grandfather, didn't my uncle say that the king of Beiliang's martial arts are very powerful?" A middle-aged man did not know whether to laugh or cry. He said, "The martial arts of scholarly work and martial arts are not about the ability to fight." After chatting for a while, the group began to climb the mountain again. Now that they had come to Wudong Mountain to burn incense, there was one thing that visitors and pilgrims had to do. That was to see with their own eyes the many Taoists on the mountain, regardless of age or seniority, who collectively participated in the morning and evening exercises. The reason why the old and young of the Yang family had rushed up the mountain so early was to enjoy the scene. Hundreds and thousands of Taoists were practicing together in the square. It was rumored that the set of fist techniques was created by the previous chief, Hong Shixiang. Anyone could practice, learn, and benefit from it. When the group finally arrived at the square of Wudong Mountain, they did not miss it. Otherwise, they would have had to wait until dusk. Sure enough, just as the rumors said, countless Wudong Taoist priests who were standing close to each other were practicing martial arts together in the square. Even the layman could tell that the set of martial arts was comfortable. Yes, comfortable. There were no profound movements, nor were there any sounds like the normal practice of martial arts. It was quiet and peaceful. The old man Yang Song praised, "What a natural and smooth move." The child who was sitting on his father's neck pointed into the distance as if he had discovered some incredible immortal. With a face full of surprise and joy, he said, "There's a child about my age who is also practicing boxing over there. There, he's at the very front." Although the old man could not see the situation clearly, he was a little surprised after hearing it. "Isn't it said that the person leading the fist techniques is the current chief, Li Yufu?" HSU Fengnian explained. Li Yufu took in an apprentice. Behind those Taoist priests, there were many pilgrims who were also practicing boxing. Perhaps it was not the intention, or even the form, but every one of them was very enthusiastic. It was just that they could not see the movements of the leading Taoist priest, so they could only practice boxing with the pilgrims in front of them or nearby. It looked a little out of place, but everyone was very serious. Then the old and young of the Yang family saw a young Taoist who did not seem to be very senior slowly walking from the front to the back. Along the way, he was constantly giving instructions to the pilgrims who were learning the fist techniques. He smiled and helped to correct any movements that were too forceful, or where the technique was not in place, or where the wrist was not enough, or where the back was misunderstood. HSU Fengnian looked at the young Taoist who was leading the fist techniques meticulously. His expression was a little strange. When the young Taoist saw HSU Fengnian, he smiled and walked quickly. Lu Chengyang whispered, "Do you want to practice too?" HSU Fengnian asked, "Do you want to see?" Lu Chengyang smiled and nodded. HSU Fengnian slowly walked forward and stood at the back of the line. Then he began to practice leisurely. The young Taoist was stunned for a moment, then he stood beside HSU Fengnian. Their movements were the same, smooth and pleasing to the eye. HSU Fengnian closed his eyes. In the past, there was an unlucky guy who knew that he would be beaten every time he saw him. He would force a smile and say, "You are here." HSU Fengnian whispered to himself, "The one who rides the bull, I am here." Chapter 1343. Wudong Mountain and HSU Fengnian were fated to be, and it was HSU Fengnian's blessed land. This was already recognized by Beiliang. It was said that HSU Fengnian, the new Prince Liang, was able to become the world's #1, thanks to the hard work of the two headmasters when he was practicing on the mountain. That was why he was able to make rapid progress in the realm of martial arts. Nowadays, the elephant cleansing pool on the mountainside of Wudong Mountain had become the holy land of neo-martial arts. The stone house behind the waterfall was crowded with martial artists from all over the world who came to meditate and face the wall every day, just to touch the immortal aura of the invincible man in the world. Every now and then, there would be people fighting for a place. This disturbed several young Taoist priests who were in charge of cleaning the elephant cleansing pool. They often complained to their master that it was delaying their practice and desperately begged for a change. Later, the headmaster, Li Yufu, let his disciple, Yufu, take over the responsibility. However, although Wudong Mountain opened the elephant cleansing pool to the public, the small thatched cottage and the small vegetable garden not far from the pool were always hidden under the instructions of Beiliang Palace. No outsiders were allowed to come near. The little Taoist priest, Yufu, would occasionally go to the thatched cottage to play. The originally abandoned vegetable garden also saw green again. After separating from the Yang family, HSU Fengnian followed Li Yufu to the elephant cleansing pool. When HSU Fengnian saw a large group of people bustling out of their tents and going to the pool to wash up with cotton towels on their shoulders, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. He turned to Li Yufu and asked, "Is it like this all year round?" Li Yufu nodded and smiled. "Yes, these martial artists generally do not make trouble. They take care of themselves. Every day, except for going to the square to practice martial arts in the morning and evening, they practice here. Wudong Mountain can't drive them away." It was unknown who had spread the news that youngest martial uncle had cut the waterfall with his wooden sword. Over the past half a year, more than 100 broken wooden swords had been fished out of the pool. Later on, there was another saying that the reason Wang Ye's divine skill was so great was because he found a martial art secret manual at the bottom of the lake. Therefore, even though these people were not landlubbers when they went up the mountain, now each and every one of them was very familiar with the water. However, they did not find the secret manual, but they did find a lot of pebbles as bright and clean as jade from the bottom of the lake. Scattered all over the place, there were at least several hundred of them. Later on, after some discussion, they found a craftsman at the foot of the mountain who polished a set of top-notch chess pieces and presented it to Wudong Mountain. Although the gift was not heavy, but the affection was heavy. HSU Fengnian was speechless. The Jianghu he was familiar with was like this. The lower the level of the market, the more pitiful and lovable it was. He found a gap and squatted by the elephant pool. Beside him were two Jianghu men who were still wearing old unlined clothes despite the cold of spring. HSU Fengnian knew that this was not the realm of being unaffected by the cold and heat. They were just pretending to be strong. In Jianghu, it was important to not lose to others. In the winter, if you wore a mink coat to keep warm, then you had to grit your teeth and wear unlined clothes. Even more ruthless, they would simply bare their arms. This was the same way as the literary world. In the midsummer, there were many madmen who wore fur coats and sang loudly in order to fish for fame. HSU Fengnian squatted down and picked up a handful of cold water to wash his face. The burly man on his left glanced at him and was surprised that a young man who looked like a scholar had come to join in the fun. He asked in the jargon, "Newcomer? Is there a mountain?" HSU Fengnian nodded. "Mountain? Qingliang Mountain should count as a mountain, right?" HSU Fengnian asked with a smile. "There are so many people squeezed here. Not to mention eating and sleeping, even farting and taking a dump isn't satisfying. May I ask, Senior, is there really someone breaking through here?" That fellow thought deeply. He probably felt that this kid was quite smart. He lowered his voice and said mysteriously, "How could there not be? 2 days ago, there was a brother who broke through the threshold of the third-rank realm in one night. It was a rather sloppy method, but after breaking through, his sword flowed like flowers and water couldn't get through. Before that, there was an old senior from Lingju who came here to comprehend the Tao. He stayed in the third-rank realm for more than 20 years. In the end, he just sat here for 3 months and broke through. I heard that after that senior became a master, he was in high spirits. On a full moon night, he let out a long roar. His voice was so loud that even a few miles away from the foot of the mountain could hear it. For a full hour, it was like thunder. Don't you think that's weird?" HSU Fengnian held back his laughter and nodded seriously. "Us normal people can't even make a pot of tea's worth of time, let alone a full hour. Moreover, we'll definitely be mute for a month. For this senior expert to be able to roar for an hour, he definitely has a lot of internal strength. He's definitely in the master realm." The swordsman on the right secretly shuddered as he washed his face with cold water. He rolled his eyes and said, "Little brother, don't listen to little Kitten Kong's nonsense. What clear and long howl? What half an hour? Those are all nonsense. Who would be bored enough to shout for half an hour? Besides, isn't that old man afraid of disturbing the rest of the Wudang immortals? I, Shu Shuriying, don't respect any martial pathmaster. I only respect the Taoists on this mountain. They are really skilled. My grandfather's grandfather personally saw old ancestor Huang. My grandfather also received help from old sect leader Wang. When sect leader Wang split the river with a finger, my grandfather was watching from the side of the river. Now that sect leader Li is also an expert, just looking at his fist, I have to give him a thumbs up." The man whose real name was Kong Dahu but who was ridiculed as Kitty Kong turned his head and looked at his brother who gave him a thumbs up. He laughed. "Forget it, Shu Shuriying. You're always bragging about your relationship with the king of Beiliang. Other than the 2 words Shu and Shu being homophones, the 2 of you are like heaven and earth, not even half a copper coin." Shu Shuriying fiercely threw the cotton towel on his shoulder and glared. "My grandfather was one of the first old soldiers to follow the great general to Beiliang. My grandfather still has the armor and the 8-dipper bow passed down by my grandfather at home." Kong Dahu laughed out loud and said, "If your grandfather is really a foreigner like the great general, then why did you say that your grandfather's grandfather had seen the founder of Wudang sect, Huang Manshan? Did you not prepare your boast properly?" Shu Shuriying felt guilty for a moment and then became angry out of humiliation. He said, "Anyway, my grandfather was born in the 2nd generation of the Liaodong Old Barracks. Before the imperial court used the era name Yonghui, he had followed the great general to the north and south. My grandfather could shoot with the 8-dipper bow on foot and hit 8 out of 10. He could shoot with the 6-dipper bow on foot and hit 7 out of 10. My grandfather said that even the great general praised his archery back then. He said that when he went to Beiliang, he would let the Beimang barbarians know the strength of the Liaodong warriors." Kong Dahu sneered and said, "I've heard that other people say that divine archers can hit 100% of the time, or they can shoot a willow leaf from 100 paces away. Your grandpa Shu Shuriying can only hit 70% of the time. How could he be praised by the general?" Shu Shuriying, "Oh Shu Shuriying, are you not afraid of choking yourself to death with your bragging?" Shu Fengnian immediately had a whole new level of respect for Shu Shuriying, because in the early days of the imperial court of Li Yang, there was a martial arts examination called the Law of Testing and Equestrian Archery. According to the law, Shu Shuriying's grandfather's archery skills were indeed excellent. It was precisely because Shu Shuriying didn't mention anything about shooting with 100 shots, that it was more realistic. HSU Fengnian asked, "Brother Shu, why didn't you enlist in the army?" Shu Shuriying sighed and said sadly, when my father was young, he wanted to study and pass the imperial examinations. My grandfather didn't like it and said that studying was useless. My father couldn't persuade my grandfather, so he could only enlist in the border army and become a small official in the Xianli ranch. In the end, I don't know how, but he angered a big shot above him. The big shot had an even bigger backer. I think it was that Huaihua great General Zhong Hongwu. When he came back, he was half dead. My grandfather was a person who cared about his reputation. Even when he died, he didn't say anything. He just wanted me, his grandson, to study. Unfortunately, I'm not cut out for studying. I only want to practice martial arts so that I can accumulate some military merits like my grandfather and get an extra set of armor for the family to pass down as a family heirloom. At this point, Xu Shuying grinned and said, I also have an older brother who joined the army at the border of Yuzhou. When he returned home during the spring festival last year, I heard him say that he would soon become an official crossbowman. My brother followed my father's example and was very good at studying and practicing martial arts. HSU Fengnian asked curiously, your father was wronged at the border. Why did he let your brother enlist in the army? Besides, the culture in Beiliang is gradually growing. Studying can also give one a good future. Besides, the northern barbarians are coming. It's not safe to be a soldier. Xu Shuying, who always gave off a sloppy feeling, said sincerely for the first time, I don't know what my brother was thinking. At first, he really didn't want to be a soldier, but after a few years, he didn't want to study at home. Luckily, there was a young lady in his hometown who missed him. She's almost become an old maid. But last year, my brother promised his future sister-in-law that as long as he became the most difficult crossbowman in Beiliang's 300,000-strong border army, he would marry her grandly the next time he returned home. As for my father, when he returned home from the border, he only knew how to drink. After my brother joined the army, he drank the most. But in the past 2 years, he drank less and didn't say anything crazy. Especially after the spring festival, he even quit drinking. Last time, when he and my brother went to visit my grandfather's grave together, when my father toasted, Xu Shuying didn't continue speaking. He lowered his head and washed his face fiercely. Although Kong Dahu and Xu Shuying usually teased each other, their friendship was actually quite good. The Beiliang martial artists who came to the elephant cleansing pool to bask in the glory were divided into different groups. Small characters like them who didn't have any family background couldn't even squeeze into the areas with good feng shui near the pool, let alone meditating and facing the wall in the stone house behind the waterfall. Some of the disciples of sects and schools formed groups, each with their eyes on the top of their heads. Not only did they feast on fish and meat every day, there were also many young female heroes who stuck close to them and messed around in their tents every night. Every morning when they woke up, their faces were glowing. People like Kong Dahu and Xu Shuying could only watch enviously from afar. Those who were more daring would go and eavesdrop. Of course, the premise was that they weren't afraid of being beaten black and blue by the young heroes of the righteous sects. Chapter 1344. There was a commotion behind the three of them. It turned out that some people had recognized Li Yufu and his disciple, Yufu. They all went up to greet them. Li Yufu was famous on the mountain for treating people kindly and not putting on airs with anyone. This was not the surface of being smooth and slick, but the spirit inside. This was also the chi of Wudang. Wudang Taoists did not care about seniority or Taoist temples. They all had the homework of reading the fortune sticks for the common people on the 1st and 15th day of the lunar month, and even writing letters on behalf of others. On this matter, an unshakable rule had been set since ancestor Lu. Huang Manshan had read the fortune sticks and written letters for people. Wang Zhonglo was like this, Hong Shixiang was like this, Li Yufu was also like this, and maybe in the future, the little Taoist boy, Yufu was also like this. Cultivation in Wudang was to cultivate people before becoming an immortal, and cultivate oneself before becoming a Taoist. This was the true chi of Wudang Mountain. HSU Fengnian and the other two turned to look at the young leader. Kong Dahu introduced him softly, this is Wudang's leader Li, a disciple that the old immortal, Yu Xingrui, took in the Eastern Sea in his early years. Leader Li's temper is very good. There are rumors in Jianghu that he killed an evil dragon in the #1 blessed land of Taoism, Earthlung Mountain. His cultivation is unfathomable. There are also people who say that the king of Beiliang made a special trip to Wudong Mountain to write to the imperial court, requesting for Wudong to be conferred as the ancestral court of Taoism. I think this is reliable. In the past, I didn't have much of an impression of that prince. Later, he sent troops to the border and refused the imperial edict to enter Beiliang, which was very satisfying. He also killed the arrogant and domineering old military chief Zhong Hongwu in Lingju. I feel that the new Prince Liang did not disappoint. This time, when the northern barbarians attacked, I heard that Prince went directly to the border and did not hide in Mount Qingliang. This matter was done to vent people's anger. Otherwise, if he became the #1 master in the world and still hid at home, it would be too embarrassing for Beiliang. For those of us who walk the Jianghu, if we leave Beiliang, wouldn't we lose face? Hsu Fengnian smiled helplessly. Xu Shuying softly said, if the battle at the border is fierce, I'll ask my brother to introduce us to kill the barbarians. Killing one is worth it, and killing two is worth it. Kong Dahu couldn't help but mock, you're just a pretty face. If you go, you'll definitely lose money. Do you really think that the northern barbarians are easy to mess with? Those barbarians have been relying on archers and horses since they were young. Their archery skills and horsemanship aren't bad. It'll be useless even if you go. Kong Dahu suddenly sighed with emotion. His Highness has done something wrong. He gave all the good stuff in the Tide Listening Pavilion's armory to that Wulin Alliance head of Mount Hui. It looks like that purple-clad woman is as beautiful as the rumors say. Otherwise, His Highness wouldn't have been so generous. Speaking of which, it's not a bad idea to leave some leftovers for us martial artists in Beiliang. Let's not talk about top-notch secret manuals, second or third-rate ones. Just give us one or two of them. Xu Shuying spat, with your little backbone, you want to become a peerless expert. Even if His Highness were to give you a pile of secret manuals, it would still be a dream. Kong Dahu didn't get angry. You, Xu Shuying, have a lot of backbone. Can't you just give me a few pounds? Hsu Fengnian tried to smooth things over with a smile. Wudong's nameless fist technique that everyone can learn has deep meaning. It contains Hong Shixiang's understanding of the Great Tao. I dare say that even if you only learn this fist technique for the rest of your life, you'll benefit from it regardless of whether you've been training in the past. Let's not talk about attaining the Tao and ascending to the heavens or becoming a first-rank expert. After all, it all depends on one's fate. But if you want to talk about strengthening the body and extending life, you'll definitely be able to ask the King of Hell for a few more years. In my opinion, even the 100 secret manuals in the Tide Listening Pavilion can't compare to that fist technique that everyone can learn. Kong Dahu was skeptical. Little brother, is this fist technique really that extraordinary? Xu Fengnian nodded and said, it's just like an article written by a blind person. It looks very knowledgeable, but in everyone's eyes, it's just that. It's not really good knowledge. Similarly, the harder it is to learn a martial art, the higher the threshold. It might not be a good martial art. Kong Dahu laughed. This logic sounds nice, but it might not be true. Which martial art in the world doesn't have a high threshold? Little brother, do you think the old god of swords Li Chuangang's two sleeves green snake is hard to learn? How could it be something that anyone could learn? The new god of swords Ng Tai's sword technique, even a master wouldn't be able to understand it. Hsu Fengnian, who was rebutted, laughed. This is the brilliance of Wudong's fist technique. It is also the true meaning of Hong Shixiang's great Tao. The heavenly Tao that people can't reach is like the dangerous path at the peak of Mount Hua. It's just a narrow path. Although there are footsteps, there aren't many people. However, Hong Shixiang's great Tao is the flat path in the world. Everyone can walk on it. As long as one perseveres, even if one's talent is mediocre, one can walk far. Kong Dahu was stunned. He pointed at this brother and laughed. It sounds like a twisted logic, but it does make sense. Xu Shuying patted Hsu Fengnian's shoulder and said, little brother, you have good perception. In the future, you will definitely become a famous master. Hsu Fengnian smiled. Thank you for your kind words. After the three of them stood up, Wudong's chief Li Yufu was still surrounded by people. The little Taoist child who went up the mountain during the heavy snowfall last year stood outside. He carefully sized up Hsu Fengnian. For some reason, the child had an unreasonable respect for this mysterious man whose identity he didn't know, but who was able to make his master pay special attention to him. But soon, he felt a sense of closeness in his heart. But in the end, it was more fear than respect. So, from the beginning to the end, the child hid behind his master and didn't say a word to this guy. Just when Hsu Fengnian and the little Taoist child Yufu's eyes met and the latter quickly turned his head, a handsome young man dressed in brocade clothes and marten fur crept up to Hsu Fengnian. He didn't dare to move forward 5 or 6 steps away. His fists were clenched and his palms were sweaty. Behind him was a group of disreputable friends who had nothing better to do and came to Wudong Mountain to admire the scenery and the moon. They didn't care about the chief of Wudong or the fist skills. But now, the officialdom of the old 3 provinces in Beiliang, as well as the descendants of the officialdom, had a completely different impression of a certain person. Especially after the young people who had competed with that person to see who was more prodigal back then added fuel to the fire, they had reached a consensus that the most manly thing in the world was a prodigal son who had turned over a new leaf. After the young man with a look of disbelief stopped, he timidly said tentatively, "I'm Liu Yukuan. My father is Liu Gongkai, the county chief of Danyang County in Lingju." Hsu Fengnian smiled. "Your elder brother is Liu Yushan, the cavalry captain of the Dragon Elephant Cavalry?" At that time, he followed the Longxiong army straight into the enemy's territory and beheaded 12 people. Liu Yukuan, who was the most domineering in the eyes of his companions, suddenly had tears in his eyes and trembled all over, as if he had been struck by lightning. Eldest young Master Liu was about to kneel down, but when he saw the man in front of him gently shake his head, he immediately straightened his knees that had already bent a little, not knowing what to do. Last year, in the farce of the officialdom in Lingju, many meritorious generals were forced to take off their armor in front of the public by a young man with the title of Lingju General, revealing scars all over their bodies. Liu Yukuan was there to watch from a distance. At first, he did not feel that the scene was very shocking. But later, he saw his elder brother who had returned from the border. His elder brother, who had always looked down on him, almost broke off relations with his father and the whole family because his father, who was a civil official, made a few sarcastic complaints at the dinner table. Later, he drank wine with his younger brother for the first time and talked intermittently about the war on the border. He talked about how his fellow soldiers died in battle calmly. Only then did Liu Yukuan begin to understand the heavy significance. So Liu Yukuan climbed Mount Wudong in the cold spring. He just wanted to know how the new Prince Liang practiced martial arts. Hsu Fengnian did not want to reveal his identity here, so he stopped chatting with Liu Yukuan. Then he said goodbye to Kong Dahu and Shu Shuriying, gave Li Yufu a look, and walked to the hut with Lu Chengyang. After he left, Kong Dahu and Shu Shuriying looked at each other. How did this guy get involved with the dignified satrap's son? Looking at the situation, he was at least a figure with a family background of the same level. How could he be patient enough to talk to the two of them for a long time? The corner of Shu Shuriying's mouth twitched. At that time, he had pretended to pat that guy on the shoulder, for fear that these aristocratic sons, who liked to hide knives behind smiles, would turn around and attack him. He hoped that he would not be put in a sack and sink into the elephant washing pool before he could figure out a master. Liu Yukuan had the courage to observe for a long time. When he saw the king of Beiliang squatting and chatting with the 2 poor martial artists for a long time, he hurried forward and made a toast. He took the initiative to get close to them and said, "Brothers, I am Liu Yukuan from Lingju. It is fate that we met. I have wine, the most authentic green ant wine. Why don't the 3 of us drink it together?" Kong Dahu asked stupidly, "Young master, you don't charge, do you?" Liu Yukuan smiled helplessly and said, "You are slapping my face, aren't you?" Kong Dahu and Shu Shuriying went to Liu Yukuan's luxurious silk tent in a daze and drank the boiling hot green ant wine. Around them, a group of playboys in bright clothes were looking at them with admiration, and the eyes of the few young and beautiful heroines were even brighter. When the two finally learned the man's identity, they were dumbfounded. In the 4th year of Xiangfu, Xu Shuying, a cavalryman from Liangju, died at the border after his brother, who was a crossbowman. In the 6th year of Xiangfu, Kong Dahu, a foot soldier from Yuju, died in Beimang's Aquarius prefecture. The two of them smiled before they died and died without regrets. Chapter 1345. On the way to Little Lotus Peak from the thatched cottage, Hsu Fengnian and Lu Chengyang unexpectedly met the old and young of the Yang family again. This kind of fate made the old family head, Yang Song, feel quite marvelous. In their conversation, some of the misgivings of a shallow friendship lessened. If Yang Song's post in Liyang before the destruction of the Great Chu was added, the old man could be said to have been a seasoned official. He had seen the 4 reigning emperors of the Great Chu and Liyang imperial courts. In fact, he had seen the new Emperor Zhao Zhuan of Liyang a long time ago. However, when Yang Song was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites, Zhao Zhuan was still a young 4th prince who was not outstanding in any aspect. When he saw the old man who often went to the diligent room to teach, he also had to bow like a student. Yang Song's eyes were shrewd and ruthless. Naturally he would not consider Hsu Fengnian to be an ordinary Beiliang pilgrim. Later, when Wudang sect leader Li Yufu received him, it confirmed the old man's opinion. It's just that both sides were well aware that there was no need to put it on the table too openly. As for which Beiliang's descendant this young man was, Yang Song, who had already seen the highest point of the Liang temple, had nothing to do with Beiliang, so there was no need to fuss over it. As the two people climbed the mountain, they unconsciously talked about the blue-eyed Grand Secretary. Regarding Zhongjulu, Yang Song, who was standing in the opposing camp, felt regret. He said that Zhongjulu was still half a step away from becoming a saint. He had achieved the goal of helping the world, but unfortunately he was not able to protect himself. Deeply worried, Yang Song said, vassal kings, foreign relatives, eunuchs, military officers, civil officials. These 5 types of people, if they do not stand upright, are the most likely to cause chaos in the world. Our dynasty's empress is virtuous and virtuous. The foreign relatives have never been able to make a name for themselves, which is the world's greatest blessing. The eunuchs were led by Han Shengxian, Song Tonglu, 2 heads of the Directorate of Rites. There's nothing to say about their character, but they were all loyal to the Zhao family's Son of Heaven. They were also very cautious in matters of authority. Our dynasty's eunuchs scrupulously abide by their duties, so there's no need to worry about eunuchs interfering in politics. With the assistance of Zhongjulu, the late emperor did his utmost to weaken the feudal vassals, quietly suppressing military force, combining hardness and gentleness. It was quite effective. The new king of Jinggan, Zhao Zun, is also devoted to the country. The king of Guangling, Zhao Yi, has no ambition. Your Beiliang is restrained by Beimang. Even if you want to, you are powerless. Then there is only the king of Yankai, Zhao Bing, who has elite troops and is good at hiding his strength. There is no big enemy in Nanjiang, so Zhao Bing can slowly accumulate power. He must be a big problem for our dynasty. Then Yang Song said self-deprecatingly, as for us civil officials, scholars can't rebel for 10 years. The emperor is the easiest to get rid of. The grand tutor has always been the highest pursuit of a scholar. Even if you can't become a grand tutor, there are so many 2nd and 3rd rank officials that you can be. As for posthumous titles, other than Wen Zheng, there are a lot of other titles that can be taken into the coffin. Taking a step back, being an official is not promising, but you can still leave your name in history. That's why I say that we civil officials are the most ambitious, but also the least promising. But Yang Song suddenly paused. With a solemn expression, he said in a low voice, with Zhongjulu as a role model for all scholars in the world for 20 years, it's different. Hsu Fengnian smiled and said, that Jin Sanlang, who rose to the top, said something that poked through the window paper. It was Zhongjulu who taught him that the people are important and the monarch is not. It was also because of this that Jin Lanting submitted to the new emperor that the late emperor decided to kill the Grand Secretary. Yang Song said bitterly, that little bastard, he's not a son, he's not a subject. Tantanan hit him well. Hsu Fengnian seemed to dismiss it with a smile, but Lu Chengyang intuitively sensed that he was revealing a trace of murderous intent. Yang Song sighed and said, almost all of the civil and noble officials of Spring Eternal Hui's Xiuqi and Ji Ping are excellent. There are no big problems to be found. However, after following Zhong Julu for so many years, once they lose the breadth of mind of the Grand Secretary, there will be a result of going too far is as bad as not going far enough. The more peaceful the world is, the easier it is for the competition between gentlemen to degenerate into a competition between personal feelings. This old man has many students, and the number of his favorite students can be counted with 2 hands. It's not that this old man is boasting, but he has always followed the teachings of the sage and taught without discrimination. In the first 10 or 20 years, nothing can be seen, but by the time this old man is about to retire, the difference is like heaven and earth. Regardless of whether they are from aristocratic families or from poor families, they can all be considered capable officials and have good governance. However, except for a few students who have managed to start and finish well, the rest more or less have some corruption. However, those with good family backgrounds have a much better table manners. Those who suddenly become powerful are unsightly. This old man was also puzzled. Later on, after thinking about it, it was one of the poor students who revealed the secret. They are afraid of being poor, and they are also afraid of being poor. Even if they don't think for themselves, they have to accumulate wealth for their descendants. Hsu Fengnian smiled and said, actually, this is human nature. Yang Song shook his head and said, as an official, it is human nature to let your descendants have no worries about food and clothing. However, to let your descendants sit on a mountain of gold and silver for 10 lifetimes is too much. Yang Song took a deep breath and forced a smile. Perhaps this is only this old man's view of the big picture. Yang Song said bitterly, 2 years ago, there was a student who this old man hoped would one day become an important minister in the palace. He was almost 50 years old. After the scandal was exposed, he knelt outside this old man's study for several hours. This old man wanted him to die, but when he thought of that young face and that pair of clear and clean eyes when he asked me for advice, this old man couldn't be ruthless. In the end, he just let him lose his official position. I heard that now that the new emperor has ascended the throne, his thoughts are active again. He wantonly operates in the capital, trying to recover. You have to know that the target of his extravagant spending just so happened to be the clan members and nobles that he thought were the rats and worms of the country back then. Ari, I still remember that this old man had tried to console him back then. Hsu Fengnian asked, did he succeed? Yang Song said incomparably self-deprecatingly, with a lot of money to clear the way, and the identity of the student of my political enemy, of course he succeeded. He became the director of the Ministry of Rights. After that, he even wrote a letter to me, his teacher, saying that he would inherit my mantle and become the assistant director of the Ministry of Rights. Hsu Fengnian clicked his tongue in wonder and said, this guy's skin isn't thin, it would be great if he came to our Beiliang. The old man asked doubtfully, why is that? Hsu Fengnian joked, just his skin is as thick as a city wall, and he can help block tens of thousands of Beimang soldiers. Yang Song immediately laughed heartily. The other Yang family members beside him also laughed. The long mountain path eventually came to an end. At noon, they arrived at the top of Little Lotus Peak. Looking into the distance, they felt relaxed and happy. Yang Song sighed sincerely to Hsu Fengnian, who was standing beside him. To tell you the truth, this old man came to Beiliang because someone invited this old man. He happened to be one of Beiliang's students. He said that Beiliang was a good place for people to vent their frustrations. This old man didn't believe him, but that guy wrote 8 letters in one go. This old man was so annoyed that he thought that it would be good to visit the northwestern frontier fortress before he died. He wrote a lifetime's worth of feminine and graceful poems. Who knows, maybe when he's about to die, he'll be able to write 1 or 2 frontier fortress poems that will be handed down for generations. The old man's grandson stood up for him and said, Grandpa's poems are wonderful. The late emperor praised them endlessly. Even Huang Longsha, one of the top 3 in the spring and autumn period, admired them. What's so feminine about them? The old man, who was in an extremely good mood, laughed and retorted, nonsense. What admiration? Don't flatter this old man. Huang Longsha only commented that it was weak and passable. Although he retorted, It was clear that the old man was somewhat proud of this harsh comment that sounded more positive than negative. HSU Fengnian smiled and said, "It's not easy to make Huang Sanjia, who never praises people, say that." The old man narrowed his eyes and stroked his beard. "That's right. This old man can only accept such words from an outsider like young Master Shu. What's the point of flattering his own grandson?" Lu Chengyang smiled knowingly. This old man was also a wonderful person. Chapter 1346. Lu Chengyang hesitated for a moment and said, "You said that Beiliang is powerless among the vassals, but I don't agree." Yang Song turned his head. "Oh." Unexpectedly, Lu Chengyang only said something that did not seem to make sense. She asked, "I think that as long as the general is here, the world will not be in chaos. Beiliang will not dare to go south, West Chu will not dare to send troops, and Nanjiang will continue to be dormant. What do you think?" Yang Song was silent for a long time. Yang Song, who seemed to be absent-minded, sighed softly and nodded. "I see. This old man understands." Lu Chengyang quickly said, "I don't dare." The old man looked away with a complicated expression and looked at HSU Fengnian. "If I remember correctly, you once said in Taiyan City that you would do something for the people of the Central Plains?" HSU Fengnian asked, "How did you guess?" Yang Song said calmly, "For a woman to have such knowledge, she must be the daughter of a big family. She also has a Qingju accent. Coincidentally, I have worked with Lu Feiqi, who is the backbone of the Green Party, in the imperial court for many years. Then, her identity and your identity will naturally come to light." The old man snorted and turned to leave. Most of the Yang disciples did not know why their ancestor's face suddenly turned from sunny to gloomy. They just followed him down the mountain uneasily. They thought that the trip to Wudong Mountain was a trip with high spirits but ended with disappointment. Lu Chengyang said apologetically, "It's my fault for drawing legs on a snake." HSU Fengnian touched her cheek and said softly, "Don't worry. The teacher of our Beiliang's dean has already prepared to stay in Beiliang." Lu Chengyang smiled. "A pillar of the country who is not a cabinet minister but better than a cabinet minister betrayed the Central Plains and went to Beiliang. This is not good news for the Liang imperial court." HSU Fengnian nodded. "Yang Song is ending his career for the scholars." Lu Chengyang blinked. "Song Dongming is very smart." HSU Fengnian reached out and tapped her forehead. "Not as smart as you." Lu Chengyang smiled. HSU Fengnian explained, "I didn't just accompany you to the mountain to burn incense and pray for blessings. This is my blessed land. To be precise, this is a part of my territory. When I fought with Wang Xianji, if it wasn't for the Wudong Mountain going all out to set up the Zhenwu formation, I wouldn't have had a chance of winning. Ever since he was born, because of his identity, fortune and misfortune were interdependent. The fortune was him, and the misfortune was his family. After I started practicing martial arts, I had many battles where my life was hanging by a thread, but I didn't die every time. Even if my vitality was greatly damaged, I could always recover afterwards. At first, I thought it was strange. Later, when I gradually reached a higher level in martial arts, I understood that the bigger the restaurant, the bigger the customer. I was like a guest going to a restaurant. Although my identity was special and I could often eat exotic delicacies, I still couldn't escape the fate of eating whatever the owner of the restaurant gave me. Huang Longsha had once divulged a heavenly secret, saying that I would probably have to eat my last meal in the next few years, and then there wouldn't be a next meal. This was probably the fate of that me in this life. I guarded the northwest gate, but I died in battle. Beiliang was gone, and 300,000 cavalry were gone. I only left a few words in the history books that I didn't know how to praise or criticize, and then this page would be over. What happens to me in the future will depend on how the heavens write the history books." HSU Fengnian's eyes were resolute. "But ever since I started practicing the blade, I never thought about accepting my fate. At that time, I was just a useless prince, and I wanted to take revenge against experts like Yang Taisui and Liu Haoshe. Later on the mountaintop, I wanted to slay the dragon and the celestials. Now, I want to protect Beiliang. I don't want to eat the last meal the heavens gave me. That's why you've also seen it for yourself." The heavens aren't easy to negotiate with either. Very quickly, the worst situation of northern Mang being pressured by 3 fronts appeared. This might be the so-called retribution of the heavenly Tao. Lu Chengyang held HSU Fengnian's hand tightly. The cold wind blew against HSU Fengnian's face, and he smiled. You must have suffered a lot to marry me. Lu Chengyang stood shoulder to shoulder with this man. There's joy in the bitterness, and the aftertaste is endless. It's enough for me to eat for several lifetimes. Li Yufu brought his disciple Yufu to the top of the mountain. There were several thatched cottages here, and they were all clean. They only saw HSU Fengnian standing on the side of the cliff. Lu Chengyan's body was weak, and she couldn't stand the wind at the top of the mountain, so she went to rest in one of the cottages. Li Yufu walked to HSU Fengnian's side, but the little Taoist boy didn't dare to come closer. He stayed a few feet away from the two. HSU Fengnian whispered, "Is it easy?" Li Yufu looked back at his disciple and smiled. "It's more troublesome than I thought. This child is stubborn and likes to get to the bottom of things. A few days ago, I helped an old man who came to the mountain to burn incense. It was a bad lot, and his grandson was going to die at the border. This disciple complained about what I did at that time, and was angry with me for several days." HSU Fengnian curiously asked, "How did you do it?" Li Yufu replied, "I didn't tell the old man the truth. I only said that it was a good lot, and it's half a blessing and half a curse. It depends on fate." HSU Fengnian asked, "What did the child complain about?" Li Yufu said helplessly, "He complained that I shouldn't have lied, or I should have been a good person to the end and changed the lot for the old man's grandson." HSU Fengnian thought about it and didn't say anything. He wasn't the little Taoist boy Yufu, so he naturally knew the complexity of the matter. He sighed. It seems that the old chief Wang Zhonglo must have suffered a lot when he had such a little junior brother. Li Yufu smiled but didn't say anything. HSU Fengnian whispered, "I've squandered most of the aura of Mount Wudong. I'm sorry." Li Yufu shook his head and said, "Since ancient times, mountains and rivers have spirits." HSU Fengnian asked, "Aren't there immortals who are spirits?" Li Yufu smiled and said, "Huang Longsha said that there were immortals in the world, and then there were no more immortals around. The more people know about it, the more they value chivalry. At that time, chivalry will become the backbone of Jianghu and the world. In my opinion, immortal cultivation is too difficult. It's far away, but it's easy to be human. If a difficult thing can't be done, everyone has an excuse. If an easy thing can't be done, it's hard to find an excuse for yourself." HSU Fengnian said, "I may not climb the mountain in the future." Li Yufu whispered, "I will go down the mountain often." HSU Fengnian smiled and said, "In the future, that child should be beaten. Who told him to kidnap my sister without telling me in his last life? He still owes me." Li Yufu smiled and didn't say anything. HSU Fengnian didn't rush down the mountain. Instead, he stayed at the top of Small Lotus Peak. Lu Chengyang sat with him at the turtle-carrying tablet for a while and then went to sleep. When she woke up the next day, she didn't know if she had a dream. She seemed to have seen a scene in a daze last night, but she couldn't be sure. After she opened her eyes, she saw HSU Fengnian sitting by the bed. The latter smiled warmly but didn't give an answer. That night, a father and son stood side by side. The old man folded his hands in his sleeves and his back was slightly hunched. The old man looked at the territory of Beiliang. The young man smiled and said, "Father, I just know that without you, there are no tigers in the mountains." The old man just gave an irrelevant answer, "If you can't bear it, don't force it. I only said half a sentence before. There's no reason that no son can't die. The second half is true, but there's also no reason that no son must die." HSU Fengnian shook his head and said, "I'm the king of Beiliang. I'm not guarding the country for the emperor of Zhao, nor am I guarding the northwest for the people of the Central Plains. Father, you also said that where mother was in the past was where Xu Xiao's home was. Later, where our children were, was where your home was. So to me, HSU Fengnian, where my parents' graves are, is where my home is. I'm afraid of death, but if there's a day when I die, I'm not afraid of dying in Beiliang." The old man pointed to the distance and laughed loudly. "This is a great place. I, Xu Xiao, led the cavalry under my command and trampled all over the 9 countries of spring and autumn. Xiaonian, will you go to Beimang for me one last time?" Hsu Fengnian nodded and said, "Okay." Chapter 1347. On the Lantern Festival of the second year of Xiangfu, Beiliang Province, Chang'an City, the provincial city of Yuzhou. The lanterns were lit, and the fireworks were dazzling. Among them was a middle-aged man in a Confucian robe who was enjoying the scenery with his family. Although he was not eye-catching in the officialdom of Yuzhou Province, he was only a secondary Class 5 civil official. There were so many generals in Yuzhou Province. Tang Wanzhen was just an assistant official from a poor family. His superior official, Hong Xinjia, was able to enter the field of vision of the central government of Liang Province, especially the Ministry of War, because of Jiyu Gentang's favor. However, perhaps not many people in Yuzhou Province had heard of Tang Wanzhen's name. Nevertheless, Tang Wanzhen's significance to Yuzhou Province, especially the military significance of the frontier line, could not be underestimated. Tang Wanzhen had made a great contribution to the Wutong system, which was said to be capable of killing 160,000 northern barbarians. It was Tang Wanzhen who had followed Hong Xinjia step by step across the gourd mouth and participated in the whole process, from the drawing of the geomancy map, the selection of the Wutong system, and the excavation of the ground. It could even be said that Tang Wanzhen had the most meticulous and perfect military map in his mind. Once the war broke out in Yuzhou Province, if Hong Xinjia and Tang Wanzhen were not at the gourd mouth, the effect of the Wutong system would be greatly reduced. Being exposed to the wind and the sun all year round, this civil official, who had a good reputation, had a dark complexion. His beautiful and fair-skinned wife, who was from Yanji County, made Tang Wanzhen look like a big piece of charcoal. This time, Tang Wanzhen returned to Chang'an City from the border to report the detailed military situation to the general of Yuzhou, Huangfu Cheng. The reason why he enjoyed the lanterns with his wife and son on the Lantern Festival was not because he was bored, but because Tang Wanzhen felt that if he missed this family reunion, he would be separated forever. Although Tang Wanzhen was a civil official, most of the civil officials in Beiliang could ride and shoot the enemy. Since ancient times, Yanji County had been rich in beauties. In the unofficial history, there was a saying that the common people still took delight in talking about. It was precisely because of a foxy woman from Yanji County that caused the great Qin dynasty to perish for 2 generations. Therefore, the people of Beiliang had a humorous saying: if you marry a wife, you should marry a daughter from a rich family in Lingzhou, and if you marry a concubine, you should marry an aunt from Yanji County. Tang Wanzhen married a woman from Yanji County, but he did not take any concubines. For many years, they lived in harmony. The only flaw was that they gave birth to 2 daughters, but they did not have a son. However, Tang Wanzhen did not feel any regret. He doted on his 2 daughters very much. On the other hand, his wife always felt that she had let down the Tang family. Tang Wanzhen often joked and comforted her, saying that the Wubao beacons at the mouth of the gourd were his sons. If it was not easy for parents to raise their children with a handful of shit and a handful of urine, then Tang Wanzhen, who was in charge of trivial matters, could indeed be called the biological parents at the mouth of the gourd. Tang Wanzhen had some solid martial arts skills, so it would not be difficult for her to kill 3 or 4 northern barbarians. Moreover, it would only be meaningful if there were many skills in the army that could be used in a battle formation. Naturally, it would not be enough to deal with the top experts of the Jianghu. Tang Wanzhen was a scholar in her bones, and she had never planned to play catch and kill with any experts in this life. Therefore, Tang Wanzhen did not know that in the crowded crowd, there were no less than 10 pairs of eyes paying attention to him. Those gazes were all like dragonflies skimming the surface of the water. They were experienced and were not even enough to make Tang Wanzhen have some kind of intuition. At most, he only misunderstood them as lechers who were drooling over the wife beside him. Tang Wanzhen and his wife each held the small hands of their daughters. It was inevitable that he was a little absent-minded because his mind was on the mouth of the gourd. He was thinking about which Wu castle needed to be strengthened, which beacon needed more manpower, which post road and which pass needed to be assigned scouts. In the army of Beiliang, young civil officials such as Hong Xinjia and Tang Wanzhen as well as the new Honglu general Cao Xiaojiao, were forcibly classified into the Chen faction. Besides being in their prime years, these border officials were more or less influenced by the former governor of Beiliang Chen Zhibao. They believed that details would determine the war situation. Therefore, they had a lot of differences with the veteran generals such as Yang Wenwan and Chen Yunchue. When the king of Beiliang changed, many people were afraid that they would be suppressed and purged. Thankfully, Hsu Fengnian did not touch the bottom line of these hardcore people after he took the throne. On the contrary, many of these hardcore people were promoted more or less. Undoubtedly, Cao Xiaojiao, the #1 troublemaker in Yuzhou province, was a typical example. They also reciprocated the tacit consent of Hsu Fengnian and the specific implementation of the policy of pacifying the border army and mobilizing the provincial army which was carried out by Xu Beiji and Chen Shiliang. Tang Wenzhen had no impression of the king of Beiliang. He did not admire or dislike him. As long as he did not come to the defense line at the mouth of the gorge, Tang Wenzhen would continue to work for him without complaint. Tang Wenzhen suddenly smiled and felt a little proud. It was true that the mouth of the gorge had consumed a huge amount of Beiliang's provisions, but he and General Hong were using those stones to exchange for the lives of the Beiliang barbarians. It was a good deal for Beiliang. The late emperor of Liang, Zhao Dun, was an open-minded ruler. Although he and the empress lived a simple life, they did not forbid women from wearing makeup. Beiliang was far away from the emperor, so they did not know what it meant to overstep their authority. Although the people were poor, their families were not poor. Every festive season, rich and powerful women would compete with each other for beauty. As long as they had money and dared to wear it, they would not be restrained even if they wore phoenix coronets and robes. At this time, in the crowd, there was a young woman who imitated the heavenly treasure makeup style of the old southern Tang imperial women. She had a graceful figure and a personal maidservant who combed her hair into a bun. One of the two women was plump and the other was slender. They complemented each other very well and were very eye-catching. Many idlers who liked to wait for an opportunity to take advantage of them swarmed over. In order to block the disaster for her mistress, the maidservant had already dropped several of the exquisite little combs made of gold, silver, and jade. However, it was still impossible to guard against them. The young woman's delicate buttocks still could not escape from the disaster. She was gently patted by a nimble skinny monkey with a mouth full of yellow teeth. Obviously, he was a veteran. The young woman was so frightened that her face turned pale and she hurriedly ran away. This scene happened to fall into the eyes of Tang Wenzhen's wife. In addition to sympathy and annoyance, she also had a hint of jealousy and ridicule. She whispered to her husband, "Wearing such gaudy clothes and without the protection of a strong servant, isn't she just attracting bees and butterflies? Who's to blame?" Tang Wenzhen did not care about these trivial matters. He nodded carelessly and had no intention of being a hero and saving the beauty. Cold women's temperaments were mostly unyielding and valiant. They were not inferior to men. Don't be fooled by their appearance of being gentle and timid. If they were really angry, they would definitely roll up their sleeves and fight fiercely, scratching other people's faces until they bled. Wasn't the wife next to Tang Wenzhen the same one who, after marrying from a small place in Yanji County to the provincial capital, rewarded the prodigal with a ruthless kick to the groin when she participated in the lantern market for the first time? Not far away, a tall old man with a felt hat on his head threw a string of copper coins as a reward to the dwarf who was performing a fire-spitting performance. At the same time, in the sea of people, there was a traveling monk who was becoming more and more common in Beiliang. He carried a bamboo rack with scriptures on his back. There was a young couple dressed in coarse linen. They were buying a stick of candied haws for their child from the man selling them. In the northeast corner of the downtown, there was a prosperous Dongfu temple. From the top of the bell tower, one could overlook half of the market. There were young masters and beautiful women in luxurious clothes talking and laughing. There were poor scholars scratching their ears and cheeks, trying to recite something. There were old men in their twilight years muttering to themselves. In the corridor outside the attic, a short Taoist holding a horsetail fly whisk glanced at the scenery where Tang Wenzhen was standing. Then he took out a small booklet from his chest and dipped his finger in his saliva. He opened the booklet and saw the name Tang Wenzhen in the light that was almost as bright as day. He chuckled softly and said, "Wenzhen, what a great name. I heard that in the imperial court of the Central Plains, only a rare court official could receive such a title after death. Boy, you should take it easy in your next life." Just as the Taoist finished his soliloquy, a series of imperceptible changes took place in the downtown area. The girl from the Heavenly Treasure makeup, who was molested by the skinny monkey, lowered her head and ran a few steps away from Tang Wenzhen. She twisted her waist. Even though she was in a difficult situation, she still had a natural charm. At some point in time, the servant girl in the bun had taken a small silver hairpin from her head. She should have flicked her wrist and flicked it upwards, but when her young miss twisted her waist to the left, the silver hairpin brushed against the right side of her waist and accurately pierced towards Tang Wenzhen's heart. But at this moment, her wrist was tightly grasped by the skinny monkey who looked no different from an ordinary ruffian. The servant girl pretended to be panicked and turned her left elbow, trying to hit the temple of the man who was trying to stop her. But in an instant, her body went limp. After the skinny monkey, who looked only obscene, held the servant girl's wrist with one hand and suddenly exerted force with the other hand, which was only a foot away from the girl's back. It was the mountain-splitting punch, which was Liu's specialty in the external martial arts school of Beiliang. This punch directly broke the delicate girl's spine. Then he carried the servant girl on his shoulder and shouted loudly that he was going to marry a wife and go home. He ran all the way, which made the people around laugh. They thought that this was a guy who dared to molest a girl in the street. He would have to eat in the state prison after this. Chapter 1348. The skinny monk-like man who was running with the woman on his shoulder had an obscene smile on his face, but his eyes were actually very deep. As a direct descendant of the Liu family, the first in external martial arts in Beiliang, although his name did not appear in the genealogy of the Liu family, his skills and temperament were naturally the best. In fact, he was an A-class master of the whisk room who had been lurking in Chang'an City in Yuzhou province for many years. At the age of 20, he was already a level 3 master of both internal and external martial arts. The maid he killed was not simple either. She was a butterfly catcher from the spiderweb room in Beimang. After the successful strike, the skinny monk-like man did not make any unnecessary movements and directly withdrew from this unconventional battlefield. He clearly remembered that when he first joined the whisk room, the senior who led the way only taught him a seemingly simple truth: there was a fine line between killing and being killed. After saying this, the senior smilingly asked him if he understood. Before the skinny monkey-like man nodded, he was sent flying backward. After lying on the bed for 2 months, he could finally get up and walk. After that, he understood a little. In the whisk room, which was built by Chu Lushan, rules were the most important. When and where to kill, what method to use to kill, when and where to withdraw. If there was an accident, someone else would secretly remedy it. No one was allowed to act on their own. The most taboo in the whisk room was to be self-righteous. If anyone dared to break the rules, Chu Lushan, the team leader, had a variety of rules to teach people. Therefore, for so many years, the assassination of the whisk room's spies and men of sacrifice was very clean from the beginning to the end. Over time, there were very few accidents. After seeing the butterfly catcher being carried away, the old man in the felt hat who had thrown a string of copper coins to the vaudeville dwarf blocked in front of the man and woman in linen clothes, preventing them from getting closer to Tang Wenzhen and her husband. The old man greeted them with a smile as if he had met a longtime friend of his. In an instant, he exchanged 6 moves with the young man. Finally, the old man with a kind smile put his arm around the young man's shoulder and stabbed a poisoned dagger into the waist of the Beimang catcher. What's more, the dagger was quickly pulled out and stabbed again. The young woman who had disguised herself as the butterfly catcher looked at all of this as usual. Even when the old man in the felt hat supported her husband and quickly moved away from her, she did not move. However, the corners of her mouth were slightly raised. When the old man in the felt hat realized that something was wrong, his head seemed to have been hit violently and he leaned back. The old man with blood oozing out of his forehead saw a young child standing not far away. The child, who looked innocent, tilted his head and gently spat out the second hawthorn seed. Then, the old man in the felt hat, whose vision was blurred, laughed. The butterfly catcher hurriedly squeezed into the crowd and disappeared in an instant. However, the child whose real age could not be guessed was left behind forever. There was a wooden stick that was originally used to skewer the candied hawthorn on his forehead. The honest old man who was selling candied hawthorns on the street picked up the child and quickly walked to the old man in the mink hat who was about to fall back. He inserted the stick that was full of candied hawthorns into the ground and freed one hand to support his old friend and the dead catcher. The old man in the felt hat was speechless. He looked at his old friend who had quarreled with him for half of his life. His lips trembled, but he could not say anything. The latter's eyes were red. He first wiped the blood on his old friend's forehead and then pulled his old friend's felt hat to cover his forehead. He said softly and hoarsely, "Laro Rong, when the Qingming festival comes back, I'll definitely bring you a pot of good wine that Master Chu gave me last year. Don't worry." The old man in the felt hat leaned back against the stick and slowly closed his eyes. A dozen or so steps to Tang Wenjin's right, a Wutong courtyard's eagle soldier and a northern Mang dragonfly catcher perished together, both of them using the dagger in their sleeves to kill each other. The two of them sat side by side on the ground, as if they were good brothers who held each other's arms after getting drunk. The young woman in the makeup that day was indifferent to the changes around her. Her only target was Tang Wenjin. The spider web that Li Mibi painstakingly managed had a pair of cocoons, 6 pole lifters, 300 catchers, and 80 butterfly catchers. She was the best among the butterfly catchers. She even had the chance to become the first female pole lift in Beimang. The premise was that she had to kill Tang Wenjin tonight. The 16 Yuju officials that she had killed before could not be compared to Tang Wenjin. Therefore, the death of those butterfly catchers was worth it. One step. She was only one step away from Tang Wenjin, who was still in the dark. Suddenly, the inconspicuous young woman beside Tang Wenjin bumped into her arms. In the corridor outside the clock tower, a burly young man with a sword appeared beside the short Taoist. He leaned his body and put his elbow on the railing. He narrowed his eyes and watched the hidden battle in the downtown area. He curled his lips and said, "What a waste of effort." The old Taoist withdrew his gaze. He seemed to be unwilling, but he still put away the booklet. He put the fly whisk on his arm and said flatly in the Liang official language, "If you want to blame someone, blame your spiderweb for the wrong information. You couldn't even find out that Tang Wenjin's wife was a spy for Beiliang." The young man with a sword had a much more pleasant Liang accent. He sounded exactly like a Central Plains person. He said casually, "I'm just a pole lift who does the dirty work. I'm not an immortal. To be honest, you, the great immortal of the Daode sect, are the ones who are called immortals." The old Taoist did not get angry. There were 135 targets in the booklet. So far, only 37 people have been killed. Not to mention the Jianghu men of sacrifice of our dynasty and the scouts and riders of Beiliang, 1 pole lift, 12 butterfly catchers, and 31 catchers have died in your spider web. Isn't the loss outweighed the gain? The pole lift of Beimang did not speak. The great immortal of the Daode sect frowned. "We don't have any backup for this trip to Chongqing City. Do you want to join hands with me to kill the heavily guarded Yuju General Huang Fujin?" The young swordsman with old age spots on the back of his hands sneered. "Apart from you, Kui Wazi of the Daode sect, who came with me to watch the show, the yin-yang face in the princess's tomb, the great music house of the chess and sword music school, and the 2 on the Devil's Master ranking didn't show up. Aren't you curious where they are? Why did the 5 of you only make a few moves along the way? It's not like Beiliang didn't send anyone to guard the front line of the Calabash Cave. Half of the Tide Listening Pavilion's experts are hiding there, waiting for an opportunity. The immortals of the Daode sect were good at cultivation, but they were not enlightened when it came to these dirty tricks. Kui Wazi was famous outside the Daode sect, but his reputation in the sect was average. His talent was average. Not to mention the immortal Yuan Qingshan, who had already attained Dao and ascended, he could not even be compared to the senior brother who had been sleeping in a small building in Shijing with the flood dragon in the vat for 20 years. However, the Empress had assigned tasks to all the major sects, so the Daode sect had no choice but to push him, the great immortal of the Daode sect. Kui Wazi also knew his own limits. Even though this spiderweb lifting pole beside him had not reached the Finger Xian realm, and he was not even sure if he had reached the Vajra realm, but if the two of them were to really go all out in a fight, the one to die would definitely be him, a genuine Daoist Finger Xian expert. Therefore, among the 5 first pin experts of Jianghu, the other 4 obviously looked down on Qiwazi. He had no choice but to be an accountant. The old immortal asked tentatively, could it be that State Preceptor Li was targeting Huang Fujin from the beginning? The old man quickly added, or the more prestigious Yuzhou provincial governor Hu Kuei in the Beiliang frontier army? The spiderweb bandit, who was skilled in disguise, could not help but roll his eyes. Playing the lute to a cow. Chapter 1349. Qiwazi clenched the handle of the fly brush and said gloomily, I respect Master Li, not you. Don't push your luck. However, the sword did not pay any attention to this virtuous and respected enlightened master of law. Instead, it turned around and stared fixedly at a weak and delicate woman who had previously accompanied a certain silk-clothed young master in a show of cultured elegance. In the general's mansion in Yuzhou, Huang Fujin, dressed in official robes, sat on a red sandalwood chair. In the hall stood an old swordsman who was resting with his eyes closed. He was carrying a heavy sword case. He was the master of the profound finger technique, Mi Fengjie, who had been recruited by the king of Beiliang himself. Compared to Qiwazi, who practiced the profound finger technique on the bell tower, Mi Fengjie's profound finger technique was based on the sword. Huang Fujin knocked on the table with one hand and held a teacup lid with the other. He gently fanned the steam rising from the tea in the cup. This powerful general had a mixed reputation in Beiliang, but no one could deny that he was the king of Beiliang's favorite. In Yuzhou, he was probably the only one who could bear the title of trusted subordinate. Huang Fujin could drink, but he did not like to drink. When he drank tea, he only drank strong tea that was so bitter that it made one's mouth feel bitter. Huang Fujin was silent. According to the intelligence reports from Wutongin and Fushirei, Beimang's network and Jianghu forces had infiltrated the hinterland of Yuzhou. Although they had spread out in all directions in the beginning, the Eagle Guard and Peregrine Falcons in the dark and the local garrisons on the surface had been exhausted and suffered heavy casualties. Later on, these desperados had chosen a central route to the south. Then, under the cover of large-scale assassinations on the left and right, they had gone straight to Yozhou's capital, Chang'an City. The target of the assassination was obvious. It was either him, the general of Yuzhou, or Governor Hu Kuei. In Chang'an City, in addition to Mi Fengjie, who had a hidden identity, there were also many second-level supreme power masters in Governor Hu's mansion to protect Hu Kuei. There was also that crazy woman, Fan Xiaochai, who was hiding in the city. It seemed reasonable for Beimang to attack Chang'an City, which was heavily guarded but had plenty of bait. After all, the life and death of Huang Fujin and Hu Kuei could affect the situation in Yuzhou province. Huang Fuji suddenly covered the teacup and said in a low voice, "That's not right." At the same time, on the outside corridor of the clock tower, Beimang, who realized that his identity had been exposed, lifted the pole and jumped without hesitation, leaving the immortal of morality sect to deal with the dangerous woman who had hidden herself deeply. He laughed and said, "Qiwazi, it's time for you to sacrifice your life for the country. When we successfully kill Yang Wenwan, I will personally send the compensation to the Daoda sect." General Yang Wenwan's tent was not in the hinterland of Yuzhou. It was only 150 miles away from the mouth of the gorge. At first, when the Yuzhou border army heard that a large number of Beimang assassins had infiltrated, they sent out 20 scouts of each group of 50 people. Great Ancestor Ji Yu was different from Chen Yunchui, who was stationed in Yuzhou. Great Ancestor Ji Yu was in charge of the situation at the border of Liangzhu province. Because he was worried about the safety of the commander, he even asked Zhu Kang, the deputy commander of the cavalry army, to send the most elite crossbowmen to the old general's tent. He completely ignored Yang Wenwan's objection and sent them to the old general's tent in case of any accidents. As the spy reports were sent, it showed that the Beimang assassins kept coming south. Especially the tent of the deputy commander of the infantry army, Chen Yunchui, was attacked at night. The Yuzhou army suffered heavy casualties. If it were not for the fact that there were enough third-level masters and masters in the ambush, the consequences would be unimaginable. Although the alert of Yang Wanwan's tent did not weaken, everyone was obviously relieved. This day just happened to be the time when the northern Mang cavalry crazily poured in from the other side of the gorge, the smoke of war rising from all directions. Yang Wanwan led 1,000 cavalry to rush to the front lines. Around the 1,000 cavalry, the crossbowmen on the 3 white horses and the first-rate scouts of the Yuju infantry were carefully and skillfully scouting. The more they did so, the more uneasy Yang Wanwan's guard commander felt when the 10 of them blocked the path of the 1,000 cavalry. At the end of the road, the person in the lead was a woman whose face was covered by a white veil. Beside her was a middle-aged scholar with thin eyes and a long beard. He had a Xiao Yarrow bandana on his head and a dark purple bamboo flute at his waist. They were the Princess Tomb and Little Thoughts. Chess and Sword Music School, Great Music House. Behind the 2 of them were 2 of the 10 giants of the Baimang Demon Path. A dwarf sat on the shoulder of a giant. It was a weird scene. The Baimang Jianghu only knew their nicknames, Iron Horseman and Thirsty Horseman. The latter was especially notorious. Just like the demon Xieling who liked to eat people's hearts and livers, they liked to drink the blood of living people. In the most unsociable position at the back, a white-haired old woman was coughing heavily. She had a delicate and beautiful flower on her head. The other 5 were all outstanding first-rate experts of the Baimang Jianghu. Yang Wanwan raised her arm and the 1,000 cavalry suddenly stopped. The old general chuckled and said, "This time, the northern barbarians have quite the appetite." The cavalry commander of the personal army was deeply worried. He urged his horse to Yang Wanwan's side. But before he could speak, Yang Wanwan laughed and said, "Don't worry. There's nothing for us to do today. Just enjoy it. In the end, there's still the existence of 10,000 enemies in the world. We generals who rely on the strength of our soldiers and horses have no choice but to accept it." In the cavalry commander's confusion, one of the cavalry silently stepped out of the formation. A man holding a long spear took off his helmet. This man, who was hailed by the world's famous general, Yang Wanwan, as the enemy of 10,000 enemies, slowly urged his horse forward. Many years ago, during the era when the sword god, Li Chungang, was the champion of the Jianghu, there was a man from Beiliang. 1 man, 1 horse, and 1 spear, he was unstoppable on the Baimang grasslands. His name was the Spear Immortal, Wang Xiu. After that, the world only knew that Wang Xiu taught a disciple who surpassed his master, the white-robed Chen Zhibao. But even the people of Beiliang, and even the king of Beiliang, Hsu Fengnian, did not know the reason why Chen Zhibao was unable to take away the famous spear, instant, after killing his master, Wang Xiu. It was because someone used an ordinary wooden spear to block Chen Zhibao, who was wielding the plum-ziching. Looking at the seemingly ordinary cavalry charging with a spear, the leader of the great music house sighed helplessly. "It's Xu Yanbing. Our previous plan has become a joke." A gust of wind blew past him and the princess. The great music house felt even more helpless. "You're courting death." The burly steel horseman galloped past them like lightning, and the dwarf laughed cruelly. When the distance between the 2 parties was about 50 steps, Thirsty kicked the giant's shoulders with both legs and used the momentum to leap forward. The thin and small figure's trajectory in the air was very ghostly and gaudy. In the end, it only brushed past him. The 1,000 cavalry behind Yang Wanwan did not see how the spear-wielding man attacked. They only saw the devilish dwarf explode into a cloud of blood in the air, and then the burly giant turned around and fled with all his might. They still did not see how the spear-wielding man on the horse moved his spear, but the enemy did not dare to run in a straight line. They circled back and forth, battered and exhausted. The next scene was even more inconceivable. The Baimang demon nicknamed Steel Horseman seemed to have been forced into a desperate situation for no reason. He turned around again and charged toward the horse. In the end, like an idiot committing suicide, he crashed into the tip of the spear, allowing the spear to pierce through his head. Xu Yanbing flicked his wrist lightly and flung the giant corpse away. He continued to charge. It was not that Thirsty and Steel Horseman were too weak to withstand a single blow, but that the opponent they chose to attack with his spear had no chance of survival. In the past, when Wang Xiu, one of the 4 great grandmasters, fought against others, Even if many of his opponents were on the same level as him, there were still very few who could withstand a single blow from him. Xu Yanbing had already surpassed Wang Xiu's peak state by a lot. This was even more so. This meant that the battle between Xu Yanbing and Chen Zhibao in the future was destined to be a matter of a single spear. Chapter 1350. After the new Jinsha in Liang, they were often not immediately appointed to an official post. Before they were officially promoted to an official post, they were sent to the 6 ministries and 9 ministers to practice their political affairs. This was the so-called Jinsha system. After the new emperor ascended the throne, he went one step further on the basis of the assistant minister of the Ministry of War to patrol the borders established by the previous emperor himself. He created the precedent of the Ministry of War officials observing the borders. This was originally one of the proposals of the king of Jing and Zhao Zun in the past. The purpose was to prevent the Ministry of War from only thinking about military affairs on paper and not being practical. It could be seen that the current emperor of the Zhao family was especially fond of this young vassal king, who was loyal and devoted during the Jingnan crisis. This time, the Ministry of War was leaving the borders of the capital, which attracted the attention of the whole court. The ranks of the officials of the Ministry of War were not high. Among them, the assistant minister of the carriage department, Kong Zhenrong, the manager of the military selection department, Gao Tingshu, and the others, and the manager of the military storage department, Yang Chiji. In the capital's officialdom, they were all typical hairless young faces. There were 2 reasons why the big shots in the imperial court paid attention to them. The first reason was that the first choice for observing the borders was not the expected 2 Liao provinces, where the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Xu Gong, was already coordinating with the Eastern Front. It was the northwestern frontier fortress of the Great Desert Smoke, Beiliang Road. The second reason was that the officials carefully selected by the Ministry of War were extremely thought-provoking. Among them, Gao Tingshu, the new second place, and Wu Tsongxian, the same year in the officialdom, were able to rise to fame in Taiyan City. Obviously, it was not enough to rely on their first or third place status. If it were not for Jin Sanlang, who spared no effort to add fuel to the fire, they would have been eclipsed by the government observation in 2 or 3 months at most. In the Zhao family Yamen, where there were many high-ranking officials, the Yonghui era had lasted for more than 20 years, so there was no shortage of Zhuangyuan, and Tanhua. As for the Jinsha, there were even more. Who in the world did not know that Jin Lanting, who had helped Gao Tingshu and helped him, had regarded the Beiliang Shu family as enemies? In addition, Yang Chiji and Kong Zhenrong's accompanying patrol was even more interesting. The Yang family entered the capital because of a woman, and Yang Jieshi and Yang Chiji became relatives of the emperor. What was even more unexpected was that the 4th prince, who had no ambition, could easily break the unshakable shackles of the imperial family's inheritance by not fighting for power. In the end, he smoothly became the emperor in the south. The emperor's father-in-law, Yang Jieshi, was previously a scholar of the Dongyuan Pavilion. Yang Chiji, who was often teased and bullied by the playboys of Taiyan City when he first entered the capital, had now become the emperor's uncle. Who did not know that the emperor not only had a deep relationship with the empress, but also had a close relationship with this gentle and elegant brother-in-law before he ascended the throne? Otherwise, how could Yang Chiji, who was also a Jinsha, become the head of the armory department of the Ministry of War? How could he be personally escorted by the assistant minister of the Ministry of Appointments and even have Minister Liu of the Ministry of War personally greet him? Kong Zhenrong was also born in Beiliang. His father, Kong Dave, had entered the capital to become an official and joined the second prince's tutelage. Kong Wuqi and Yang Chiji were brothers who could wear the same pants as the king of Beiliang when they were young. Adding on Li Hanlin, the only one left in Beiliang, the 4 of them had visited at least 70 or 80 brothels together in Beiliang, if not 100. Thus, there was a lot to chew on. Of the 4 brothers, not to mention Hsu Fengnian, the hereditary king of the border, even if Li Hanlin had a father who was a second-level official in Liang, what position was he in now? He was just a small crossbow bolt. Moreover, Li Gongda, who was widely recognized as a skilled official, had only been a governor for a few days. His butt had not even warmed the chair before he was quickly pushed aside by an outsider like Song Dongming. On the contrary, in the capital, not to mention Yang Chiji, who had an extraordinary status, Kong Zhenrong was already a powerful figure in the Ministry of War. If they were in any other province, even an old county governor would have to address Kong Zhenrong as his brother and treat him with great care. Perhaps, the latter would not be willing to accept it. Not long after they entered the border, they received the shocking news that the Baimang army was advancing on 3 fronts. The old men of the Ministry of War intended to take a detour around the relatively peaceful border of Yuju as an explanation to the imperial court. After that, they would immediately set off for Jibei to greet Yuan Tingshan, who had recently risen to power. After that, they would go to Liao province and meet with Jiyu Zhentang and the right assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Xu Gong. It was supposed to be a safe and peaceful journey. However, they did not expect that they would encounter such a tricky situation as soon as they entered the eastern part of Yuju. Who knew if that northwest barbarian surnamed Shu would feel that he had been disgraced by the imperial court and become so bold that he would order the Bailiang frontier army to disguise themselves as Baimang cavalry and wipe out all the officials of the Ministry of War? Among the officials of the Ministry of War, a few old men who had witnessed the dangers of the officialdom hurriedly stopped at a courier station at the border. They discussed for the entire night but still failed to come up with a perfect plan. However, the young and vigorous Gao Tingshu did not agree with them. Not only did he propose to go straight to the calabash mouth of Yuju, but he also proposed to take a look at Hutu City, which was the most impregnable pass in the northwest of Liangju province. The old men, who were already afraid of the cold, were so scared that their lips turned purple. If not for the fact that the bannerman was a junior in the officialdom who had a good impression on both Jiyu Zhentang and Minister Lu, he would have been kicked out of the Ministry of War by the time he returned to the capital. Compared to Gao Tingshu, who was like a newborn calf that was not afraid of tigers, Yang Chiji, who had been gentle and courteous along the way, was much more amiable in the eyes of those old foxes in the officialdom. After a torturous night at the courier station, they did not know how many times they had picked the wick. In the end, it was Yang Chiji who came up with an idea that made the old men feel more and more appropriate the more they thought about it. The imperial uncle proposed not to go to Yuju province or the northern line of Liangju province, but to go directly to Bailiang Palace and Mount Qingliang. Liang Shehu, who was in charge of the specific affairs of the department for purging officials, stroked his beard and made up his mind. He squinted his eyes and smiled as he said, "Good." Official Liang found this young imperial uncle more and more pleasing to the eye. Going to Mount Qingliang, which was famous throughout the world, was a good idea. No matter how unruly the king of Bailiang was, even if he had dared to send troops to resist an imperial edict, he would not be so daring as to kill someone in his own palace, right? Besides, with the friendship that Yang Chiji and Kong Zhenrong had built up with the king of Bailiang, even if there was not much left, going to Bailiang Palace would not be a hongmen banquet. Besides, who had not heard of the spectacular sight of tens of thousands of carps swimming in Tidehark Lake? There were so many officials in Grand Peace City, but how many of them had the opportunity to see it with their own eyes? After leaving the capital, Gao Tingshu, who appeared to be in high spirits, hesitated for a moment. In the end, he did not say anything that would offend the public. It seemed that Manager Yang's status as the imperial uncle was not something that he, the second-ranked scholar with an unstable foundation, could provoke. Chapter 1351. When the political observation team stopped at the relay station bordering Liangju to rest, Kong Zhenrong, who was returning to his hometown for the first time since he entered the capital, found Yang Chiji, who was reading Sages at Night. He sat down and did not say anything. After a few years of polishing, Yang Chiji gradually lost the childishness of a foreigner entering the capital. Furthermore, he had a scholarly temperament. After the Yang family had a meteoric rise, this young scholar with a weak temperament had imperceptibly become more assertive. This made his father, who was the Grand Secretary of the Grand Hall, feel very gratified. Kong Zhenrong did not speak, and Yang Chiji did not take the initiative to speak either. There was only the sound of him flipping the book and the occasional sound of the lamp wick cracking in the room. In the end, it was Kong Wu Kai who could not hold it in and asked in a low muffled voice, "Yang Chiji, do you think Brother Feng will be angry and refuse to see us?" Yang Chiji continued to read and seemed to be unsure. He said softly, "I don't think so." Kong Zhenrong, who had just shaved his beard this morning, touched his stubble and sighed sadly. You are lucky. You and Hanlin have been together with Brother Feng for a few more years. I ran to the capital a few years before you. The last time Brother Feng went to the capital, my father was muddle-headed and tricked me to go to the south of Jingji early. In the end, we did not meet. Yang Chiji, you read more books. Do you think Brother Feng will think I am not loyal? If I had known it would be such a depressing situation, I would not have gone to the capital with my father even if I had run away from home. Yang Chiji did not flip the book again. He stopped at the page in his hand and was silent. Kong Zhenrong asked, why don't you go to the Ministry of Personnel or the Ministry of Rights? Why did you come to the Ministry of War? Didn't you hate war and bloodshed the most since you were young? Yang Chiji sighed. It is because I hate it that I want to go to the Ministry of War. Kong Zhenrong rolled his eyes. You scholars have a lot of tricks up your sleeves. You don't say it directly. Others take off their pants to fart, but you wear your pants to shit. Yang Chiji's eyes suddenly sharpened. He looked out of the window and whispered, when you go back, tell Uncle Kong to stop writing to King Tang of Gangnam-do. Seeing Kong Zhenrong's confused appearance, Yang Chiji almost squeezed out word by word. Especially the matter of King Tang sending people to the capital to present the auspicious white deer. Tell your father not to get involved. Kong Zhenrong wondered, isn't this a good thing? Yang Chiji sneered, you don't have to care about anything. You just need to tell your father that it was an unintentional remark I made after a family banquet. Your father knows the severity of the matter. Kong Zhenrong, who used to be Yang Chiji's shield, looked at Yang Chiji's face and said softly, eating chicken Yang, I don't think I know you. Yang Chiji's originally tense face softened a little. He picked up the book on the table again and said almost to himself, I didn't want to either. The following trip to Liangju made the hearts of the officials, including Liang Zhenrong of the Department for Purging Officials, slowly relax. Not only did the local armies of Liangju open the gates for them, there was also a newly appointed lieutenant who personally escorted them to the outskirts of Liangju city. Although there was a hint of surveillance, at least on the surface, it gave enough face to the Ministry of War's political observation this time. Liang Zhenrong did not have a military background, but as an old official of Zhonglu of the Ministry of War, his vision was not bad. He could tell that Beiliang's local army was strong, far superior to the capital and Jeju. Naturally, he began to feel fear of the Shu family's 300,000-strong cavalry. He sighed with emotion. It turned out that Beiliang's light cavalry was already so majestic. When the group of officials, who were looked at like monkeys by the people of Liangju, arrived at the gate of the king's mansion at the foot of Mount Qingliang and saw the 2 stone lions that were as tall as 2 people, even the experienced and knowledgeable old men of the Ministry of War looked at each other and gasped. How majestic! Yang Chiji and Kong Zhenrong's expressions were complicated. Gao Tingshu snorted coldly, scaring Liang Zhenrong into coughing heavily, afraid that the people of Beiliang Palace would hear. In Liang, there had always been a saying that the local officials were 3 feet lower than the officials of the capital. This meant that the prestige of the officials of the capital was naturally 3 ranks higher than that of the local officials. Now, there was no need to mention the officials of the Ministry of Personnel who were arrogant towards the officials of the capital. Although the Ministry of War, which had lost its backbone, was beginning to be overshadowed by the Ministry of Personnel led by the new heavenly official of Liang, Yin Mao Chun, its prestige was still there. Liang Zhenrong was the chief official in charge of all the political plans in the world and a proud scholar. Therefore, when he led the way through the side gate of Beiliang Palace, he had the air of a capital official that swayed his sleeves as he walked. Even the steward of the king's mansion could not help but take a few more glances. The king of Beiliang, Hsu Fengnian, did not appear from the beginning to the end. It was the deputy of Beiliang's Ministry of Economy, Song Dongming, who came out to greet the guests. He said that the king of Beiliang was in charge of military affairs at the border and could not leave. Liang Zhenrong and the other old foxes could not wait for the son of a butcher to ignore them. They said a bunch of flowery words that did not cost any money and praised the king of Beiliang for being so busy every day that he even had to go to the front lines to guard the northwestern border for the imperial court. Song Dongming, the self-appointed deputy of Beiliang's Ministry of Economy, smiled and accepted everything on behalf of the king of Bailiang. It was probably because the deputy had the aura of a famous scholar from the Central Plains that made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Liang Zhanrong and the others immediately felt a lot better. They also felt that it was a pity that Song Dongming was a bright pearl covered in dust. If he went to the imperial court in the capital and stood side by side with the officials of the imperial court, that would be a sight to behold. After Song Dongming held a welcoming dinner for the officials from the Ministry of War, unexpectedly he did not have any intention of fooling around. As soon as he put down the chopsticks on the table, he stood up and led everyone to his office on the mountainside of Mount Qing Liang to take a seat. He took the initiative to talk about the Northern Liang Dao military officer's appointment and the border army's promotion and change, including the sensitive and important military affairs. Observing politics from the Ministry of War was a bit like patrolling on behalf of the heavens, but Liang Shihu dared to think this way when he went to Jeju. How could he dare to be so arrogant in Northern Liang Dao? He had originally thought that they would be lucky if they could eat a few meals and drink a few pots of green wine. He had even prepared himself to be ignored. The elders, including Liang Zhanrong, insisted on only listening and not speaking. However, Gao Tingshu was not so particular. He asked many times about the distribution of troops in Bailiang and the specific military affairs at the border. Song Dongming did not show any displeasure and always found some excuse to skip the questions. Liang Zhanrong was originally happy that Gao Tingshu was the first to stick his head out. If he could really find out the truth, it would be a great contribution. However, after the young manager kept asking, Song Dongming narrowed his eyes and lowered his head to drink his tea. Liang Zhanrong could no longer sit still. He glanced at the door in fear, afraid that if the deputy threw his cup, 500 executioners would rush out and push them to the ground, chop them up, and feed them to the dogs. Liang Zhanrong hurriedly tried to smooth things over. He said that he had heard that the scenery of the Tidehark Lake was the best in the world and wanted to bring his colleagues to see it for themselves. Song Dongming did not stand up this time. He only smiled and let his subordinates lead the officials to Tidehark Lake. Song Dongming then went to the top of the mountain alone. He looked at Hsu Fengnian, who was travel-worn, and asked, "Since you're back, why don't you talk about the old days?" Hsu Fengnian shook his head. He looked at Tidehark Lake and said, "Sir Song, come with me to the back of the mountain. Let's go together and engrave the 296 names on the tombstone." Song Dongming nodded. The deputy of the administrator, who was walking with Hsu Fengnian to the back of the mountain, was obviously angry for a long time. Finally, he could not hold back his anger and said, "What a good saying. But what about the 296 people in Bailiang?" Hsu Fengnian said calmly, "Bailiang will remember it." Chapter 1352. Behind the mountain was a forest of steles. Stone steles were everywhere, and there were even more under construction. Most of them were still wordless, but there were already several hundred stone steles in the periphery that already had owners. They were all made from calligraphy pills, and they were all from the dragon elephant cavalry who had died in the battle in Liuju at the end of the auspicious year. There was an ancient saying that one would be thin if they used ink, and fat if they obtained vermilion. Therefore, calligraphy pills were best made with strength and hard bones. The people who had drawn these stone steles were two renowned Bailiang calligraphers. Because Mi Qiong and Peng Henian lived in the north and south of Liangshan, there was a saying that the south's muscle and the north's bone. Because of the conflict between the north and south, the two old calligraphers put on a stance that they would never interact with each other. Moreover, when Great General Xu Xiao was still alive, they did not think much of Bailiang's military and political affairs. However, when the Bailiang Palace announced that they were going to erect 300,000 stone steles, Mi Qiong was the first to go to Mount Qingliang. He asked a few questions, and after getting the answers, he stayed there and then wrote a letter to Peng Henian. The general idea was, "Grandson Peng, do you dare to come face to face with your grandfather?" Afterwards, Peng Henian took the set of 4 treasures of the study that he regarded as his life and ran to the back of Mount Qingliang. He and Mi Qiong built a hut and lived next to each other. The two old enemies actually became neighbors. Then, in the midst of the two old men sparring, or more accurately, quarreling with each other, The deputy administrator Song Dongming personally gave them a list. On the list were names and two simple things: when and where they were born, and when and where they died. At the beginning of the calligraphy pill, the two old men still had the intention of competing. Later, when Mi Qiong wrote a name, he suddenly burst into tears. Liu Hongyi, a young man from Chunshui County in Lingju. When he was young, he relied on his family background and was unbearably naughty. This old man even scolded him for wasting that name. This child was only 21 years old, how could he die just like that? After that, Mi Qiong Peng Henian became more and more silent. Other than communicating with the stonemasons who were responsible for carving the words on the back of the book, he did not like to talk much. Today, when the Mi and Peng elders heard that someone had arrived at the Steely Forest, their hearts tightened. With complicated feelings, they took their luggage and ran over to take a look. To their surprise, it was the king of Beiliang who had come in person. The two elders were not used to bowing to anyone, so their actions were very unfamiliar. Hsu Fengnian hurriedly helped the two elders up, but did not exchange any pleasantries. After a moment of hesitation, he divided the pile of paper into 4 portions, one for him and one for Song Dongming, and the other half for Mi and Peng, the two calligraphy grandmasters. The 4 silently began to write on the stele. Behind the 4 of them, there were 2 to 3 skilled craftsmen who had already prepared the tools and were waiting for the carving. In the evening, the sound of metal and stone clanging could be heard. Xu Fengnian and Song Dongming finished half an hour earlier than the 2 old men. By the time they finished the last batch of rice, it was already dark. They didn't even have time to wipe their hands full of red rice. The old man walked to Xu Fengnian's side with a tired look and asked in a deep voice, "Why are there wars everywhere in the hinterland of Yuju?" Hsu Fengnian said softly, "The spies of Beimang have infiltrated and are wantonly assassinating the officials of Yuju." Mi Qiong directly pointed at Xu Fengnian's nose, jumping up and down as he cursed, "Back then, when your father was still alive, Northern Mang also had assassins ambushing us. How could they have been stopped outside the pass? How did you become the king of Beiliang? Aren't you the best ace in the world, Hsu Fengnian? Do you only know how to stare all day long? You watch people die in front of your eyes, and then you collect their corpses and pretend to write a few names." Song Dongming was about to speak when Hsu Fengnian, wearing a thick fur coat, waved his hand and stopped the deputy administrator's explanation. He looked at the old man and said apologetically, "I didn't do a good job." Peng Henian's personality was not as impatient as Mi Qiong's, but he was still angry. However, he still pulled on the latter's sleeve. When Hsu Fengnian had walked far away, the gloomy-faced Mi Qiong spat heavily at the back of the figure. He threw the priceless green crab shell inkstone in his hand onto the ground and said, "I'm not writing anymore. I'm not staying in Beiliang anymore. I'm going to Jiangnan. I'll write the words Hsu Fengnian is a bastard for as long as I can live in this life." Not long after, Song Dongming turned back and saw Mi Qiong standing in the same place with his eyes closed. Peng Henian squatted on the ground and sighed. Neither of them picked up the inkstone. Song Dongming bent down to pick up the inkstone. He was not in a hurry to return it to its owner. He looked at the top of Mount Qingliang and said in a low voice, "The 2 of you probably haven't heard of Beimang's sword aura is close to Huangqing and who the founder of the chess and sword music school's bronze statue is. Neither of you have seen a real dragon. In fact, I, Song Dongming, have never seen one. But I know 2 things. First, Huangqing died in Liuju. The real dragon raised by Beimang is also gone. Along with it, hundreds of qi cultivators hiding in Beimang's Shijing are also dead. The second thing is that there are 2 tombstones here. They are almost engraved with 2 names. Coincidentally, both of them have the surname Xu Longxiang and Hsu Fengnian." Song Dongming turned around and returned the ancient inkstone to Mi Qiong. He smiled calmly and said, "If Beimang is really gone one day, Hsu Fengnian will definitely be included on the tombstone. Of course, I, Song Dongming, am an outsider. At that time, I hope that old me will be willing to write it." After saying that, Song Dongming slowly left. Peng Henian deliberately did not look at Mi Qiong, whose face was flushed red. He counted with his fingers and seemed to be talking to himself. "Hsu Fengnian is a bastard. Hey, That's not right, old M.I. You calculated wrongly. It's 9 words, not 8 words like you said. Mi Chong carefully kept the ancient inkstone. He rolled his eyes and said, Mi Chong is a bastard, okay? It's exactly 8 word. Peng Henian laughed out loud and said, sure, why not? Isn't your birthday in a few days? I'll write a piece of calligraphy for you. How about that? Mi Chong did not care about being polite. He flew into a rage out of humiliation and said, write your head. Chapter 1353. After that, the 2 old men did not immediately leave the steely forest. Like last time, they carefully examined the stonemason's carving to prevent any mistakes. Generally speaking, even for the book core, because the stonemasons who carved the book core were often very different in terms of calligraphy, there was often a situation where the book core was out of shape. Although Mi Chong and Peng Henian did not ask for too much, they still wanted to make it perfect. Perhaps the 2 old men felt that this was the only thing they could do well. However, the stonemasons' carving skills were satisfactory. Although they were not as good as the original, they were enough to express 50 to 60% of the original book core's charm. The stonemasons' meticulous carving was naturally much slower than their writing. Mi Chong carried a lantern and checked the steelies one by one. Suddenly, he heard Peng Henian anxiously calling him over. Mi Chong thought that one of the stonemasons had made a mistake and ran over to take a look. He did not expect that Peng Henian was standing in front of a row of steelies. There was no stonemasons working in front of the steelies. He only saw old man Peng squatting in front of a steely with a lantern. He could not wait to stick his eyes on the steely as if he had discovered the book core. Mi Chong went over to take a look. It was the king of Beiliang's Hsu Fengnian's book core. At first glance, the meaning was not ordinary. However, in Mi Chong's opinion, although it was indeed superior, it was still far from being a celestial item. It was far from enough to make Peng Henian make a fuss. Peng Henian did not turn around. He stretched out his hand and touched the carving. Soon, he staggered backward and fell to the ground. His eyes were closed and tears flowed out of his eyes. He threw the lantern away and covered his face with his hands. His expression was extremely painful. He pointed at the steely and shouted, "Old me, come closer and look with your eyes wide open. But remember, don't look for too long. Remember." Mi Chong raised the lantern and looked carefully. He only felt a sharp chill in his face, making him feel as if he was in an abyss. Obviously, this was not because of the Hsu Fengnian's book core, but because of the finishing touch of the carving master. Mi Chong's eyes soon stung. He closed his eyes and shook his head hard. He murmured, "The beginning and the end are decisive, like the Kundao cutting jade. How could this be carved by the best stonemason in the world in such a short period of time? This is truly a work of the gods." Peng Henian sat on the ground and rubbed his eyes. He sighed. Someone wrote it with their fingers. That's the only explanation. Mi Qian said incredulously, "Most martial arts grandmasters can make swords with their fingers, but there is no one in this world who can write such charm." Peng Henian smiled bitterly. Could it be a ghost? Mi Chong stood up and looked at the night sky with the lantern in his hand. "I didn't believe in ghosts and gods before, but now I hope that ghosts and gods really do exist in this world and can bless us, Beiliang, and defeat Beimang." Peng Henian slapped his head. "Hurry and have someone tell His Highness about this. Don't complicate things." Hsu Fengnian quickly rushed over. Beside him were a man and a woman who carried the lantern. There was a great difference in age between them. One was Mi Fengjie, the master of the heavy sword cave, whose realm was still steadily rising. The other was Fan Xiaochai, a loyalist of the northern Han nobility. The former had been guarding Huangfu Jin during the Battle of the Spies in Yuju and had not accomplished anything. However, Fan Xiaochai had killed Kui Wazi, the Daoist priest of the Daoda sect, on a clock tower in Chang'an City. By the time the spies from Wutongin and Fushirei went up to clean up the mess, the scene they saw was truly tragic. Minced meat was everywhere, and the walls were stained with blood. At the time, they saw Fan Xiaochai sitting on the balcony railing, fiddling with the flybrush that had been left behind by a Xian finger expert. She did not seem like a powerful top-notch assassin, but rather like an innocent young girl. HSU Fengnian squatted in front of a monolith. Beside him was a middle-aged man who was also the leader of Beiliang Palace's guards. The latter was apprehensive as he reported, "We've found it. This stonemason is called Wu Jiang. He should be using an alias. He has been a third-rank servant for 16 years and 4 months. His nickname is Old Ginger, because the old man likes to eat ginger, regardless of whether he eats or drinks." Last year, when the monolith forest was recruiting craftsmen, Wu Jiang was transferred here from the prince's estate. His Highness, this subordinate was incompetent and did not recognize him well. "Please punish me." HSU Fengnian shook his head. "It has nothing to do with you. There is no need to blame yourself." HSU Fengnian slowly stood up. He turned to Mi Fengjie and asked, "How is it?" Mi Fengjie said in a low voice, "I only saw a word and a sword." The sword aura was unstoppable. HSU Fengnian smiled. "Wu Jiang, Wu Jiang. Wu, Jiang, Jiang family, is Da Chu without boundaries?" HSU Fengnian said softly, "This person has no ill intentions. You don't have to investigate this matter." HSU Fengnian returned to Mount Qingliang and walked towards the mausoleum. His parents were sleeping there. After Xu Xiao's death, HSU Fengnian built a cenotaph for his master, Li Yishan. HSU Fengnian walked into the mausoleum path alone and remembered many things. His master said that the words on tombstones were the saddest in the world because the epitaphs were all written by the living in the world of the living to the dead in the world of the dead. The deeper the feelings of the person who wrote it, the harder it was to write it, the more godly it was. According to his will, Li Yishan's ashes were scattered on the yellow sand of the northwest border. Originally, his master did not want a grave, but HSU Fengnian still made a cenotaph on his own initiative. He did not write an epitaph, just like the monument forest behind Mount Qingliang. He only wrote his name and the time and place of his death. He believed that his master's spirit in heaven would not be too angry about this. HSU Fengnian felt that Huang Longsha was dead. It was a strange feeling, but he did not doubt it. The 3 great devils of spring and autumn, Cat Man Han Shengxian, died in HSU Fengnian's hands. Butcher Xu Xiao was gone, and 3-inch tongue chaotic spring and autumn's Huang Longshan was also gone. The 3 were no longer in this world. Huang Longsha occupied the top 3 of the 13 ranks of spring and autumn. He boasted that he was first in 19 Dao, first in cursive script, and first in divination of yin and yang. Sword armor Li Chungang died. Soldier armor West Chu's war Saint He Baikue died in the Battle of the Western Fortress, which made Chen Jibao. The peerless Sejio, the Empress of Chu, had also passed away. Zither armor, the blind zither player of the old southern Tang, drowned in the river with his zither after the fall of the country. Western Shu painting armor Ju Yuing, before he died, he painted a long scroll of Shu's mountains and rivers. He lay on the scroll and died drunk. Earth armor Situ Shents, proficient in geomancy, looking for qi, pulse, and acupoints. After Li Yang unified the world, he was secretly sentenced to death. Dharma armor Zun Ping, cooked and eaten by the people. Daoist armor Qi Xuanzhen died on the demon-slaying platform. Monk Shijia Dragon Tree died outside the Daode sect in Beimang. Out of the 13 ranks of spring and autumn, 12 of them had already passed away. Only one unimportant Dao armor was left. It was likely that he had also died in obscurity due to the general trend of the world. In fact, ever since Jiyu Jiantang became recognized as the world's #1 saber master, this Dao armor, who had only appeared briefly in Jianghu and whose name was unknown, was mentioned less than Li Chungang, who had stayed under the tide listening pavilion. When Li Chungang returned to being a sword immortal in the great snow plains of Mount Hui, he could not be compared at all. On a night in early spring, snowflakes floated down from the sky. The snowflakes seemed to be getting more and more intense. HSU Fengnian could not help but stop and raise his head to catch the snowflakes. For some reason, HSU Fengnian thought of White Fox's face and his or her 2 sabers, spring thunder embroidered winter. HSU Fengnian still did not know who White Fox's face was. Was it really called Nangong Push? Why did she come to Beiliang? Why did she insist on entering the tide listening pavilion? HSU Fengnian would leave for Yuju the next morning. The reason he did not meet Yang Chiji and Kong Zhenrong was not because he had a problem with them, but for their own good. But even if he was misunderstood, even if he did not meet them, Hsu Fengnian still rushed back to Mount Qingliang. This was what brothers were like. Hsu Fengnian only recognized 4 brothers in his life: Li Hanlin, Yang Chiji, Kong Wuqi, and Wen Hua. Suddenly, Hsu Fengnian, who was walking slowly in the wind and snow, saw a strange figure standing in front of the 2 tombstones with his back to him. This scene did not make sense, nor did it make sense. The Beiliang Palace of today could be said to be heavily guarded, compared to the situation in which His Royal Highness had deliberately created a loose exterior and a tight interior in order to fish. Not to mention entering the forbidden area of the mausoleum, the figure turned around and said flatly, "Return on a snowy night." Chapter 1354. Hsu Fengnian did not know who the person on the stele was referring to, but with his excellent memory, he recognized the old man's identity at a glance. It was the old servant of Mount Qingliang who had temporarily become a stonemason, Wu Jiang, who loved eating ginger. When they first met, the old man was standing among the group of stonemasons. His figure was stooped, his face weathered, and he was not eye-catching. If Hsu Fengnian had not fallen so much, he might have been able to see some clues at that time. Hsu Fengnian did not retreat, but instead advanced slowly. Only then did he realize that the old man, who had straightened his back and did not pretend to shrink back, had an excellent bearing. He actually had the powerful aura of an elder in the palace hall. In Hsu Fengnian's impression, the older generation of masters who were pure Jianghu people, except for Han Shengxian and Sui Xiejiyu, were easily intimidating. At first glance, old Huang, the old man in the sheepskin coat, and the old Zhenren of Mount Longhu, Zhao Shituan, were not even close to the high and mighty masters of the martial arts. This confirmed Hsu Fengnian's previous guess. Even if the old man, who used the pseudonym of Wu Jiang, was not the West Chu dynasty's master of calligraphy, Qi Lianhua, who was known as the second of the millennium ranking, he was still closely related to the master of calligraphy. It was not difficult for a person to hide one's inadequacies, but it was not easy to hide one's inadequacies in calligraphy. Qi Lianhua, who was born in a powerful family, was recognized as a master of calligraphy with extraordinary talent. However, in the Da Chu dynasty, he was only an official in the Hanlin Academy. He only did small things like helping the emperor surnamed Jiang write articles on titles and inscriptions on steles. He edited half of the history books of the previous dynasty that died without any illness. Therefore, at that time, he was also nicknamed Qi Lianhua and Tianhua Lang. The latter implied that Qi Lianhua could only add flowers to brocade and not provide timely help. After the fall of West Chu, the Qi family of Guangling declined. Qi Lianhua's whereabouts were also unknown. Qi Lianhua was originally the West Chu's book armor, who was known for his semicursive script. As soon as his Warring State style was published, it was praised as the world's second semicursive script. Later, Nailan Yusi, who was appointed by the Liang government as the double champion of spring and autumn calligraphy, had the world's first semicursive script, Shengguan style, to compete with him. However, the people of the world were not willing to accept this saying. They did not recognize Nailan Yusi as the double champion, and only recognized that Qi Lianhua's calligraphy attainment was close to that of the ancient sages. However, as for the spring and autumn book armor, it belonged to none other than Huang Longsha, who was known as the unrivaled champion in cursive script. Later on, Liang impatiently pushed out this old man of the Song family as the first champion of literature, but he was also sneered at by the people of the time. It was fine if this old man of the Song family was content to be the head of the literary world as a lackey of the Zhao family of Liang. However, with the Shangyin Academy's Chancellor Qi Yanglong Zhu in front of him, how could he be the first champion of literature for the spring and autumn book armor? The Liang imperial court was not satisfied. Although there was no first champion of literature, there was no second champion of martial arts. Therefore, they wanted to push Wang Xianji of the martial arts city as the first champion of literature. However, they were directly rejected by the self-proclaimed second in the world old monster Wang. As a result, there were many dazzling versions of the spring and autumn book armor. Among them, there was a certain number champion of the Taoist surnamed Zhao from Mount Longhu. However, The most widely circulated and most convincing version was still the earliest version. Although many people missed out on the spring and autumn book armor, no matter what, as long as they were nominated by others, they were naturally dragons and phoenixes among men. HSU Fengnian's master, Li Yishan, praised Qi Lianhua's calligraphy skills to the extreme. He said that the running script was worthy of being called the best in both ancient and modern times. Therefore, HSU Fengnian was naturally implicated. When he practiced running script in his youth, he always copied the few authentic Qi pads that had been handed down for generations. He didn't know how many times he had scolded Qi Lianhua. HSU Fengnian was very curious. If the old man in front of him was really Qi Lianhua, how did he become a West Chu loyalist who had slipped through the net of Mount Qingliang? In order to make the Beiliang Palace, which was full of experts, misjudge him, it was not enough to rely on mere forbearance. It was necessary to have the support of terrifying strength. HSU Fengnian was not surprised by the old man's hiding in the Shu family. Jiang Genai was the only bloodline of the West Chu imperial family. Naturally, the West Chu scholars, who had been raised by the country for 200 years, would not be able to repay the kindness of the king even if they did not die. However, what really made HSU Fengnian apprehensive was that the fact that the fallen Princess Jiang Sai had been brought back to Beiliang by Xu Xiao was a huge secret. Otherwise, Cao Changqing would not have secretly investigated the Liang court for so many years without any results. How did the old man in front of him know about this? HSU Fengnian did not immediately retreat from this mausoleum. Instead, he looked into the eyes of a remnant of the old Chu. This was actually a very big risk. Although Xu Xiao had taken the liberty of leaving behind a precious remnant evil surnamed Jiang for West Chu, after all, Xu Xiao had personally taken down the western fortress. He had also personally led the troops to break down the main gate of West Chu's imperial palace. The emperor and empress had died right in front of Xu Xiao's eyes. It could be said that Xu Xiao's feelings toward West Chu could only be described as personal gratitude and national hatred. Moreover, the current Guangling Road was filled with smoke, and the battle in Liang was not going well. In the eyes of the common people, even if the Beiliang cavalry could not withstand the invasion of Beimang's million-strong army to the south, it was definitely more than enough for them to retreat out of the barren northwest and run to the central plains to clean up the West Chu rebel army. At present, from top to bottom, many people felt that this was undoubtedly the king of Beiliang, HSU Fengnian's choice of retreat. Leaving Liang would not result in the loss of a single soldier, and Beiliang would also have enough military merit to arrange a retreat for its generals. Everyone was happy. As for the 300,000 border troops, at worst, they could just disband them. In any case, the Great Pillar State Jiyu Jiantang's 2 Liao border troops could absorb more than 100,000 soldiers in one go. For this reason, the imperial court of West Chu paid close attention to the Beiliang frontier army's movements, especially HSU Fengnian's. They were afraid that the young vassal king would one day lose his mind and lead his army all the way to the central plains, using the Da Chu as a proof of allegiance to the new ruler of Liang. At this moment, the only experts at HSU Fengnian's side that could act were Mai Fengjie and Fan Xiaochai, and they were both outside the mausoleum, forbidden from entering the forbidden grounds. The sword-eater ancestor, Sui Shegu, and the Wu clan's 100 cavalry were on the northern front of Liangju, in case Beimang tried to assassinate Chu Lushan in the Beiliang protectorate, regardless of the cost. Xu Yanbing was still single-handedly pursuing that group of top-notch Beimang experts that had infiltrated Yuzhou. Tantai Pingjing and the disciples of the Guanyin sect were also working with Xu Yanbing, determined to keep that little idea and the Great Yu house in Yuzhou. In the past, where in the world would HSU Fengnian not be able to go? The old man carefully sized up this somewhat absent-minded young man, a complicated look in his eyes. Perhaps his very existence made the surrounding atmosphere a little more hostile, but for some reason, the old man in his twilight years did not seem to harbor any hostility. HSU Fengnian's peak cultivation was no longer present, but his sharp intuition was still present. As a result, when Mai Fengjie and Fan Xiaochai realized that something had happened in the mausoleum and rushed into the garden, HSU Fengnian only raised his hand, indicating for them to withdraw. Mai Fengjie silently left. Fan Xiaochai hesitated for a moment, then continued to stand in the distance. HSU Fengnian also did not make a fuss about this female sacrificial warrior's overstepping her bounds. Chapter 1355. The plainly dressed old man put his hands behind his back and said with a smile, "Xu Xiao has never done anything that I like in his life, but he did give birth to a good son." Hearing these incredibly disrespectful words, HSU Fengnian couldn't help but furrow his brows. However, he quickly felt relieved. The older generation of scholars had always paid attention to strength of character. Otherwise, how could they have the confidence to rule the world together with the emperor? Besides, it was very likely that this person was a lone official of West Chu who had concealed his identity. It was reasonable for him to have a monstrous grudge against Beiliang and Xu Xiao. HSU Fengnian asked with a smile, "May I ask if you are the master of calligraphy of West Chu?" The old man's expression was somewhat strange. He neither denied nor admitted it. He just stared straight at HSU Fengnian. If HSU Fengnian, who resembled Wu Su in appearance, was a handsome young master in the eyes of the women of the world, then one could vaguely see that the old man in his prime had a graceful bearing when he was young. At the very least, he could be called an old jade tree. HSU Fengnian felt somewhat uncomfortable being sized up. When people looked at him in Beiliang, they mostly looked at him with disdain as His Royal Highness wasted his good looks. Later, in Tian City, they looked at him with disdain as the son of a butcher. After the results of his battle with Wang Xianji came to light, there was a great change. Even Beiliang border generals, such as Li Mofen and Wang Lingbao, who were known for their arrogance, had a heartfelt reverence and admiration in their eyes. Only the old man in front of him had a strange look in his eyes. The old man said softly, "Earlier, when I saw your calligraphy on the stele, I could see that you had put in a lot of hard work. You have to thank Li Yishan for being able to bravely advance on the martial path since you started practicing the blade in Wudong. Practicing calligraphy and playing chess are two different things. Once you reach a certain level, you can learn everything. Although not every master of calligraphy or chess can become a capable official of the world, or a grandmaster of the martial path like Li Mi's disciple, it is very beneficial to the molding of a person's temperament." After the hot-tempered Xu Xiao became a vassal, his temperament changed greatly. This has a lot to do with the fact that he learned chess in his later years. HSU Fengnian did not say anything. When Xu Xiao made his fortune in Liaodong's Jinju, he was just an illiterate wanderer. It could be said that HSU Fengnian's ancestors had nothing to do with any scholarly family or farming family. After Xu Xiao came to Beiliang, he became a terrible chess player. It was not without reason that he could play to his heart's content with his second sister Xu Weixiong's master, Chancellor Wang. At first, it was because HSU Fengnian's mother wanted Xu Xiao to play more chess to temper his hot-tempered temperament. When he was old, it was time for him to cultivate his temperament. At first, Xu Xiao always slacked off and escaped whenever he could. Over time, the princess consort did not say much. Later, HSU Fengnian fell in love with playing chess. Probably after the princess consort passed away, the relationship between HSU Fengnian, the eldest legitimate son, and Xu Xiao became strained. Xu Xiao probably wanted to spend more time with his son and finally began to seriously learn chess. However, His Royal Highness quickly widened the gap between him and HSU Fengnian. After that, HSU Fengnian and Li Yishan did not like playing chess with Xu Xiao. No matter how hard they played chess, they could always defeat Xu Xiao. Even if Xu Xiao wanted to humiliate himself, it depended on whether the master and disciple, who were the only people in the world who could not give him face, were in the mood. Xu Weixiong had always been able to patiently play chess with Xu Xiao. However, perhaps in the heart of Xu Xiao, who had never concealed his preference for boys, it was more interesting to play chess with his son. Even if HSU Fengnian killed all the chess pieces on the chessboard and left only a few pieces, the old Prince Liang, who had won many battles, and the lame Xu, who was recognized as the most ambitious person in the Liang dynasty, would also feel very happy. His peerless achievement in pacifying the spring and autumn period allowed Xu Xiao to be on equal footing with the late Emperor Zhao Dun's father when they met. In the future, when he attended court, he would be able to carry a sword into the palace. However, in Mount Qingliang, many scenes always made people, especially outsiders, feel that it was absurd. Xu Xiao was being chased in Wutonghan, and the one sitting at the head of the table at the prince's manor banquet was the young heir. Not to mention the families of nobles, marquises, generals, and ministers. Even if it was a small family, the father should not spoil his son so much, and the son should not be so disobedient. In the end, Liang dynasty found an unassailable reason to attack Beiliang. If the upper beam was not straight, the lower beam would be crooked. Hsu Fengnian shook his head gently, forcing himself to focus. Although the old man in front of him did not reveal any murderous intent, he was still a first-class hidden master. The great battle of Liang Mang was on the verge of breaking out. If he were to die here, the place of his death would still be passable, but the timing would be completely wrong. Other things aside, at least a few 100,000 northern Mang people would be spared from death. The old man smiled and asked, "Do you think I am Qi Lianhua from West Chu?" Hsu Fengnian nodded. The old man slowly stretched out a palm. "When you pick up the brush, you must concentrate, just like the sages of the previous dynasty when hundreds of people sat at the same table. Your heart is righteous and your qi is harmonious. Only then can you understand the mystery and be close to the great way. The way is like the heavy weapons of a national temple. If it is empty, it will be full. If it is full, it will be overturned. If it is only in the middle, it will be flat." The old man's hand gesture changed. The ancient people's wrists were haunted by ghosts. When they wrote, it was as if they were assisted by the gods. Therefore, if the tip is straight, it will be full of power. If the second is heavy, it will be the real finger. If the real finger is flat, it will be flat. If the palm is empty again, it will be used as one wishes. Together, the scholar's calligraphy is also. Da Chu has nurtured its soldiers for 200 years. The country has been destroyed for 20 years. There is still a morale that cannot be disgraced. For the ring, it will be melancholy. For the wave, it will be limp. When the brush is sent out, the proud shoe will come out. As the old man spoke, wind and thunder filled the garden. Outside the mausoleum, Mi Fengjie's face was pale. The sword in the case on his back was trembling incessantly, as if it had been struck by lightning. In the garden, Fan Xiaochai's face was pale. She was on the verge of collapse, but she still gritted her teeth and stubbornly refused to take a step back. This old man's palm slowly turned over. It seemed like he was just picking up the brush and slowly sketching. It was like a pedantic old man teaching the children of a private school how to write stroke by stroke. However, in Hsu Fengnian's eyes, it was a perilous situation. It even reminded him of the time outside the Great Hall in Taiyan City, when Jiyu Gentang had used the world's #1 talisman blade, Nanhua, and used the Thunder Cube to return the courtesy of Cao Changqing. The two were different paths leading to the same destination. They both had the ability to turn something rotten into something magical, reaching the realm of perfection. The wind and snow drifted. Hsu Fengnian's expression was heavy. Previously, he and the sword grandmaster Mi Fengjie had both believed that the remnants on the stone tablet were sword qi drawn by fingers. Now, it seemed like they were off by a hair. This old man used a blade. Hsu Fengnian did not look at the chaotic wind and snow that seemed to have been cut by blades. He asked, "So old Sir Qi is the blade armor of the 13 armors of spring and autumn?" The old man did not answer the question. Instead, he bent his 5 fingers slightly and made a closing gesture. He asked in return, "Is it a joint plan?" Hsu Fengnian, who was standing in a circle with not a single snowflake in a radius of several zhong around him, helplessly replied, "It is the character for Nyan." The old man withdrew his hand and sighed, "Yes, the character for Nyan." Hsu Fengnian. The wind and snow in the garden finally returned to normal. Snowflakes rustled and fell on Hsu Fengnian's head and shoulders. Chapter 1356. The old man who should be West Chu's sage of calligraphy, Qi Lianhua, laughed self-deprecatingly. Spring and autumn saber armor? Saber and brush officials, saber and brush officials. Saber and armor it is. For thousands of years, the world had always been proud of practicing the sword. Not to mention paladins, even scholars from all over the country often carried swords when they traveled to study, to show their spirit. In the competition for the head of 100 weapons, sabers were always inferior to swords. In terms of numbers, sabers did not lose to famous swords. Moreover, most of them were legendary in Jianghu. For example, the big frost saber in the hands of Hsu Fengnian's disciple, the stories of its previous owners could be said to be soul-stirring. However, ever since Lu Zhu became famous for beheading people with flying swords, the way of the sword became the most outstanding branch in Jianghu, while the reputation of the saberman became worse and worse. There had never been a master who used the saber to reach the top of the way of the martial arts. In the last 100 years, there were sword armor Li Chungang and peach blossom sword god Ng Tai. Although they both lost to Wang Xianji, no one could deny that these two champions of the way of the sword were outstanding. On the other hand, the number one saber user, Jiyu Jiantang, had never been ranked high on the list of martial artists. His reputation in Jianghu was also mediocre. No one had ever heard of anyone practicing the saber because they admired great General Gu's kung fu. There were some who picked up the saber because they envied great General Gu's military achievements, but the world's men, even the devil Han Diaosi, said before his death that he had once thought of roaming Jianghu in green with a sword, let alone other young men. How many women had heard of Li Chuangang's name and could not forget him? Even Hsu Fengnian himself, who pretended to be a young swordsman in Beiliang before he practiced the saber in order to deceive women, wished that he could hang famous swords all over his body. The sage of calligrapher Qi Lianhua was actually the saber and armor that only Jianghu caught a glimpse of. This truth was really moving, and even more so, it made people envious of West Chu's flourishing scene in those days. It was indeed worthy of being the orthodox literary lineage of the Central Plains. There was Li Chungang wielding his sword across the great river of Guangling, there was a literary hero who distributed small boats and drank wine, there was 100 poems, there was a woman whose beauty could cause the downfall of a city or a state. There was also the state preceptor Li Mi and the proud master and disciple of the Cao family working together to stop a game of chess when the snow began. It was no wonder that some people said that the destruction of West Chu was not the fault of the emperor, the scholars, and the common people. If they wanted to hate, they could only hate that the heavenly time was in Liang and not Jiangchu. The old man waved his hand at Hsu Fengnian. The old man was the first to crouch down. Looking at the tombstone of Princess Consort Wu Su, his attitude was no longer as spirited as before. There was only the bleakness and desolation of the most ordinary lonely old man in the world. In a low voice, he murmured, "What does Xu Xiao count for? He's just a crude martial artist. It's fine if he marries a woman of passable beauty." Hsu Fengnian was furious. He laughed coldly and said, "Old sir, do you really think that if you and I fight to the death, I, Hsu Fengnian, will definitely lose?" Qi Lianhua dismissed it with a smile and asked, "You haven't gone to your hometown in Jinju to pay respects to your ancestors, have you?" Hsu Fengnian didn't answer. In reality, it wasn't just him. Xu Xiao hadn't gone to Jinju since he was made empress. Hsu Fengnian's grandfather had passed away very early. At the time, Xu Xiao had just left Liaodong and was fighting fiercely with the powers of the vassal towns in the south of Liang. After Hsu Fengnian was born, he had never seen his grandparents. Xu Xiao was the only child, so he didn't have any relatives from the Xu family. In the early years, some distant relatives from Jinju had run to Beiliang to claim kinship with Xu Xiao. Xu Xiao, who had been looked down upon in his youth, could be considered extremely benevolent and gave them a share of wealth and glory. As for the elders on his mother's side, Wang Fei Wusu almost never mentioned them. When Hsu Fengnian was young, he would occasionally hear his mother mention that his maternal grandmother was a good person who got along well with others. It was a pity that she had passed away early. As for who his maternal grandfather was, his mother had never said a word. Xu Xiao also wasn't willing to say much. Only once, when he was drunk, did he angrily say that the old man had died a long time ago. Hsu Fengnian guessed that Xu Xiao must have been rejected outside the Wu family's sword tomb when he had asked for marriage. He had been beaten by his father-in-law with a sword until he pissed his pants. From then on, they had formed a grudge and never had any contact with each other again. Hsu Fengnian also had resentment towards that maternal grandfather. Later on, his aunt at Mount Qingcheng always wore armor and covered her face. It was the Wu family who had made things difficult for his mother that caused his aunt, a sword attendant, to have her face cut beyond recognition by the sharp sword Qi. Although it wasn't his maternal grandfather who had done it, Hsu Fengnian felt that if that maternal grandfather had said a few words of justice and treated his mother's running away from home, the Wu family's sword tomb wouldn't have been so cruel and vicious. Especially after learning that his own uncle, Wu Qi, purposely met in Beimang but didn't acknowledge him. In the end, he went to Shishu to assist Chen Zhibao. Hsu Fengnian really didn't have any good feelings towards relatives and elders with the surname Wu. Even though the current head of the Wu family, who he should have called great-grandfather, had taken the initiative to make up for it once on the Beiliang border, Hsu Fengnian couldn't help but feel a knot in his heart. The old man let out a long breath and said ruefully, "I once helped Da Chu compile the history books of the previous dynasty and read them all. At the time, although my bladesmanship didn't have the name of a grandmaster, it had the strength of a grandmaster. However, when I was compiling the history books, I often felt terrified at night. There was no other reason than the 3 words people eat each other everywhere in the books. Although it is normal for the world to rise and fall, every time there is a turmoil, the suffering of the people is really unspeakable. On the road outside the outskirts, dawn and dusk are like sheep herding. The clamor of eating and choosing the fat part, the swift blade descends to strive for victory. What kind of tragic scene is this? The road is full of the dead, and the living are ghost neighbors. The common people of the world are half-wandering ghosts. This isn't a poet in troubled times moaning about nothing. I saw with my own eyes that at the end of the spring and autumn period, boys were sold for a few copper coins, and girls were only worth a handful of corn. Later on, some parents couldn't bear it and exchanged children for food with others. In the end, people in the world were no longer human, but worse than ghost. How can I not hate Li Yang? How can I not hate Xu Xiao, who went all the way south to destroy cities and countries? In the old days, the nobility's house was a place where foxes and rabbits roamed. In fact, it wasn't just the nobility's house that was like this. Hsu Fengnian grabbed a handful of snow from the ground and held it in his palm. He couldn't help but interrupt the old man's speech. Xu Xiao said that a person should know their place. The first-class scholar Qi Jiping, the second-class scholar, can also complain for the common people. As a warrior who carries a blade, he only knows how to fight and only fight. If you give him a few thousand people, he will conquer a city. If tens of thousands of people, he will conquer a country. When he has hundreds of thousands of cavalry, what else can he fight if not the world? So later on, when so many people scolded him, he never talked back. He also didn't think that what he did was right. In the Beiliang army, the older generation like Yang Wenwan, Zhong Hongwu, He Zhonghu, and the younger generation like Chu Lushan, Li Mofen, and Cao Xiaojiao, which one of them isn't a notorious veteran ruffian in the eyes of the world? Hsu Fengnian's expression was firm as he said in a deep voice, but it can't be denied that if someone has to be the butcher who helps Li Yang unify the world, then Xu Xiao is definitely the best result. Qi Lianhua sighed. I really haven't thought about this. The old man, who was deep in thought, suddenly laughed. Huang Longshe has a poem that is widely circulated. The country is broken, the mountains and rivers are still there, the city is in spring and the trees are deep. This old man of the Song family in Liyang commented that the word deep is not as good as the word life. If we use the word life, we can combine movement and stillness. The scholars of Liyang's literary circle all applauded. What do you think? Hsu Fengnian said calmly, my second sister once said in Shangyin Academy that this old man of the Song family changed a dog's fart. Qi Lianhua asked, then aren't you curious about which family Xu Weixiong is the daughter of? Hsu Fengnian was touched and couldn't hide his anger. It's none of your business. Qi Lianhua narrowed his eyes and smiled. Hsu Fengnian, oh Hsu Fengnian, you really are similar to your father, Xu Xiao. Hsu Fengnian took a deep breath. I respect Sir's loyalty to West Chu and your many years of hiding in Beiliang Palace to protect the fallen Princess Jiang Genai. But Sir shouldn't think that you can really do whatever you want in the Xu family. The old man didn't think much of it and sneered. Oh. At some point, The two of them were standing in a position where Qi Lianhua's back was facing the entrance of the mausoleum and Hsu Fengnian's back was facing the two tombstones. Then, the two of them took a step forward at almost the same time, but the back of their feet was stepped on by the other's other foot. Hsu Fengnian used his two fingers as a sword and stabbed the old man between his eyebrows. The old man raised his palm and slapped Hsu Fengnian's chest. The old man's body spun like a top. At the same time he removed the finger sword, his large sleeves fluttered, stirring up a snowstorm and creating the scene of an earth dragon drinking water. Hsu Fengnian was pushed to the tombstone by the palm strike. He stuck one hand to the back of the tombstone and pushed lightly, borrowing the force to charge forward. Hsu Fengnian, who was in the air, kept his two fingers together and swiped them across the top of the old man's head. Boundless sword qi immediately poured down from the sky. The old man sneered. His footwork was completely different from the martial artists of the world. His 2 feet were slightly tilted inward, one hand behind his back and the other clenched into a fist. He stepped forward in a straight line and avoided the sword qi. His fist just happened to land on Hsu Fengnian's stomach. The fist was as heavy as a drum. Borrowing the force from the rebound, his 5 fingers immediately loosened and he pushed out with his palm. Hsu Fengnian's body flew backwards, exploding with ear-piercing sounds like firecrackers in the snowy night. Qi Lianhua's fist, palm, and footwork were all very simple and straightforward. It was easy to associate him with the conceited Wang Xianji, who had once regarded himself as an enemy of the world. He was as fast as lightning and as powerful as a thunderclap. He only used his bare hands to face his enemies and disdained all the divine weapons in the world. Hsu Fengnian was actually not that heavily injured. He had only been pushed back by the old man's single move. His heart was in turmoil, and the qi in his body that was already in a mess became even more unrestrained, like adding oil to boiling water. This gave him a new understanding of the spring and autumn saber armor. He originally thought that Qi Lianhua was at most on the same level as Sui Xiejiyu, but it seemed that he was at least a little bit higher. If it was before the Zhonlong in Liuju, Hsu Fengnian was confident that even if saber armor went all out and he was careless, he would not be in such a difficult situation. After Hsu Fengnian landed, a trace of blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. However, he did not wipe it away. He did not care, nor did it matter. Hsu Fengnian had experienced many life and death battles, and this was not the first time he had experienced them. The old man clicked his tongue and said, "With your current terrible situation, you would have at most used 3 moves to put your life on the line. Against a normal Vajra or mysterious finger expert, 3 moves would have been enough. Unfortunately, you met me." Hsu Fengnian calmly said, "There was no need for 3 moves. 1 move was enough." The old man asked, "Even if you die, you still want to protect the 2 tablets behind you? If you die, what's the point of the tablets? Aren't you, Hsu Fengnian, the king of Beiliang? Don't you know how to choose?" Chapter 1357. The old man was probably a true old man. He was rather talkative. At this moment, he was still advising him with kind words. "Kid, the world's beauties are like bamboo shoots after the rain. Even if it's a source of soldiers, there's still an endless supply of them. However, there are 2 things that are difficult to replenish. One is the heavy cavalry on the battlefield. One is missing, and it's very difficult to quickly replenish them. The other is the Jianghu experts. Every one of them needs talent, luck, and many years of training to become one. Especially you, Hsu Fengnian. You have to cherish your life. If you die..." The snow gradually grew heavier. Hsu Fengnian ignored the old man's nagging. He raised his hand. A snow knife appeared in his hand. However, the old man suddenly became sentimental. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked at the sky. Beiliang, fighting a country with the power of 1 land. "If you die," the old man muttered to himself, his expression bleak. "I don't care at all whether Beiliang has a king of Beiliang or not. However, how can I, Qi Lianhua, not care whether Hsu Fengnian dies or not?" A hint of confusion appeared in Hsu Fengnian's eyes. After being struck by Qi Lianhua's fists and palms, The qi in his body actually showed signs of turning from bad to good after experiencing the initial violent tremors. It began to stabilize. The old man's face was filled with anger. He glared and said, "Kid, only now do you understand my good intentions?" Hsu Fengnian was confused, but he still gripped his snow knife. He asked in confusion, "What are you trying to do?" The old man who had once said that he would return on a snowy night became even more angry. "Kid, aren't you a clever person? Why are you so stubborn?" Hsu Fengnian was also angry. He glared at him. Looking at the stubborn young man, the old man seemed to remember some things from the past. The stubborn old man who had been unyielding in this world all his life softened a little. His tone was gentle, and he said somewhat helplessly, "I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to guess. Didn't I use the alias Wu Jiang?" Hsu Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Didn't I already guess that you are Qi Lianhua and the spring and autumn saber armor?" The furious old man suddenly stomped his foot heavily. The wind and snow above the entire mausoleum froze. "Didn't Xu Xiao tell you that his father-in-law's surname isn't Wu? Even if that bastard Xu Xiao didn't mention it, Su didn't mention it to you either. Didn't I tell you that there was a swordsman surnamed Qi who fought in the Wu family's sword tomb for a woman of the Wu family and almost destroyed half of the Sword Mountain?" Hsu Fengnian turned around. His expression could not be seen clearly, and there was no change in his tone. "No. No." The old man was truly enraged. He pointed at Xu Xiao's tombstone and cursed, "You barbarian from Jinju. Back then, in order to marry my daughter, you said that you wouldn't kneel to the heavens or the earth, but now you're kneeling to your father-in-law. You're just a small military officer with a few hundred people under your command, yet you dare to threaten me. If I don't agree, you'll definitely lead an army to wipe out Dhu. I should have killed you with a single palm at that time." When the old man fell silent, there was only the sobbing of the wind and snow in the courtyard. The old man's eyes were kind, but his face was also full of guilt. He gazed at the back of the young man who was far, far more pleasing to the eye than Xu Xiao. He slowly said, "The first time I secretly saw you, it was when the Shu family's armored cavalry was on their way to Beiliang. It was also a snowy night like this, in a small temple. You were punished by your mother to study all night. You held a book in your hands and sat on the knees of the Buddha statue in the main hall. Under the light of the Buddha statue's everlasting lamp, you read until dawn. Beside you, there were 4 clay statues of heavenly kings. They either carried sabers or swords, or their faces were ferocious. The light of the lantern was dim. Outside the hall, the wind and snow were like female ghosts weeping and complaining. Even an adult would be afraid, but a child like you was not afraid. I watched you from the beam for the whole night. I really liked you from the bottom of my heart. You really are my grandson." The old man's heart surged with a heroic spirit that came from his grandson. "I don't recognize Xu Xiao as my son-in-law, but I like you as my grandson. Even if Su didn't recognize me as her father, I still shamelessly came to Liangju. After Su died of illness, I changed my name and became a lowly servant. Who am I? Qi Lianhua? I can win and lose on the chessboard with Dhu's imperial advisor Li Mi. I can drink wine with Taifu's son Shiji and talk about the country. I can stand shoulder to shoulder with Yi Baikue on the battlefield. I can make Cao Changqing, who is waiting for the imperial decree, call me half a teacher." Hsu Fengnian, who had his back to the old man all this time, squatted down and looked at the 2 tombstones. He asked, "Why didn't you formally marry my grandmother back then? Instead, you let my grandmother and my mother depend on each other for survival in the eyes of the family." The old man was silent. His eyes were full of sorrow and regret. Hsu Fengnian said softly, "The country is beautiful, the country is beautiful. The country is in front and the beauty is behind. Do you think the country is more important? Or do you think that a real man doesn't have to worry about not having a wife? You are the famous icing man of spring and autumn. Do you think that women are just icing on the cake in your life?" Hsu Fengnian asked again, "Why didn't you protect my mother during the white clothes case in the capital?" Without waiting for an answer, Hsu Fengnian said in a hoarse voice, trembling, "So I didn't know I had a grandfather. I just thought he died a long time ago. Whether his surname was Wu or Qi, whether he was a hero or a nobody, it didn't matter at all. After a long time, the old man sighed and was speechless. Hsu Fengnian sat cross-legged in front of the tombstone. He bent down and reached out to brush away the snow in front of the tombstone. Qi Lianhua walked to the tombstone and lowered his head to look at Xu Xiao's tombstone. He said indifferently, "When I heard the news and rushed to Tian City, it was already too late." The old man said self-deprecatingly, "It doesn't matter if you don't recognize me as your grandfather or if you think that Qi Lianhua is cold-blooded. I think that no matter how much you dislike the man your daughter chose, a married daughter is like water that has been poured out. Moreover, at that time, 3 sabers and armors couldn't kill the Liang Emperor, Zhao Dun. Since that's the case, as for the Yuan Bengxi, Xu Xiao, Han Shengxian, and Liu Haoshi, as long as Xu Xiao is alive, it's him who has the courage to do it. If Xu Xiao can't do it, there are still my daughter Wu Su's children." The old man turned to look at Hsu Fengnian, who was constantly sweeping the snow with his hands. He said softly, "The Taoist saints said that life and death are like sleep. When you sleep, you can get up and live. When you sleep, you can't get up and die. Therefore, there is a great terror in this world. When people are alive, they cry instead of laughing. In the Buddhist scriptures, there is also a great terror of life and death." The old man also squatted down and said freely, "Maybe you're right. Xu Xiao is much stronger than the spring and autumn saber armor or Dhu. It's just that I don't want to and don't dare to admit it." The old man looked at Xu Xiao's tombstone and said with a smile, "In the end, I couldn't even drink a cup of wine from you." Hsu Fengnian said softly, "It's too late." Hsu Fengnian's eyes reddened. "In the past, I couldn't understand why there was a pair of shoes in the box under Xu Xiao's bed that didn't fit anyone in the Xu family." The old man was stunned. Then the old man laughed loudly. He clenched his fists and rested them on his legs. "Spring and autumn is a dream of spring and autumn. People live for a lifetime, but life and death are 2 things. When you come, you cry, but when you leave, you smile." Then the old man stretched out his hand and held a cup. A crystal-clear cup of snow appeared between his 5 fingers. Snow fell from the cup. He said loudly, "Father-in-law toasts to my son-in-law. A cup of snow for wine. A cup of wine without wine. Little Nyan, this old man wants to make a trip back to Guangling. I've left my hometown for too long. Don't send me off." After toasting, the old man turned around and patted away the snow on one of his grandson's shoulders. He took out a yellowed book from his bosom and gently placed it beside Hsu Fengnian. With one last sentence, the old man stood up and shook his sleeves. He began to stride towards the entrance of the mausoleum. As soon as he left, his figure flashed and disappeared. Hsu Fengnian, who was a step too slow, was completely unable to stop him. Outside Liangju City, the old man walked further and further away. His speed was so fast that even Beiliang's A-ranked horses could not match him. A cold blade gradually formed from snow appeared in the old man's hand. Everyone knew that Dhu practiced calligraphy all his life. His favorite characters were Su, Nyan, and Chun. His daughter, Wu Su, was gone, but his grandson, Hsu Fengnian, was still alive, and he was very promising. He had nothing to worry about in this life. It was time to get rid of the nickname of Qi Banbu. There was no harm in making the name of Qi Tianhua a reality. Little Nyan, take it as your grandfather's last selfish act. Let the world know that after your father died, you still have an elder in this world. With me, Qi Lianhua, there is no one who can disgust Beiliang without paying the price. The great pillar of the country, Jiyu Gentang, can't. The new emperor of the Zhao family can't either. Little Nyan, you just need to guard the northwest gate of the Central Plains." Hsu Fengnian's figure flew quickly and stood alone at the top of the city wall. However, all he could see was a vast expanse of whiteness. After standing for an entire night, at daybreak, Hsu Fengnian remembered the old man's last sentence and muttered to himself, "Can I really do it?" In the spring of the 2nd year of Xiangfu, a terrifying piece of news was sent back to the capital from the borders of Liao and Liao. Jiyu Gentang had lost. Moreover, he had lost to a person who used a blade. More importantly, The martial arts grandmaster who had appeared out of nowhere did not mention his name. He only mentioned an unimaginable identity. At dusk, in the suburbs of Tian City, two men who were about one generation apart in age sat opposite each other in a pavilion. The younger one was the young phoenix of the Song family, Song Kelly, who had recently made a comeback in the capital. Song Kelly had not yet taken up a post in the capital, but Jin Lanting, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, had invited Song Kelly to his family banquets several times. Many old people in the capital, especially the nobles of the imperial clan, had also expressed their goodwill.